Hello, thank you everybody for attending the May 23rd Policy and Services Committee. Councilmember Du Bois. Here. Councilmember Koo. Here. Vice Mayor Niss. Chair Wolbach.
Here.
3 present.
Thank you. So our first item tonight is going to be a discussion of topic of aircraft noise. But before that, do we have any speakers for oral communications on items which are not on the agenda? Okay. And also heard from City Manager and just the opportunity for staff. Would it be okay, just given the full agenda tonight, if we delayed item 3 until the next meeting?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair. Typically we try to accomplish the Policy and Services Committee's business in about 3 hours. It's 6:15 now, so that would be 9:15. And so we have the 3 items: aircraft noise. Second item is the recommendation from the Utilities Advisory Commission and staff related to our fiber to the potentially our fiber initiative, and I know that the committee has been anxiously waiting that we see that, and that'll be an involved discussion. So we can move off item 3 relating to regulations related to recreational medical marijuana. Your next meeting will be on June 13th, and the city attorney advises that we would need to have that item scheduled at that particular time. So that being said, anybody who is here for item number 3, medical marijuana, that will be removed and rescheduled until June 13th.
Let me just ask, was anyone here to speak to item 3? Okay. In that case, if it's all right with fellow members of the committee, we'll table item 3 until the next meeting. That way, also the staff who's here to work on that item is free to, take off for the evening. So with that, let's move on to item number 1. Again, this is discuss the topic of aircraft noise, review federal legislative updates, and recommend that City Council reaffirm city's positions to reduce aircraft noise and make other recommendations as needed to advance the city's goals to reduce aircraft noise over the skies of Palo Alto. We do have a number of public speakers. We will give each person 3 minutes to speak. You don't have to use all 3 minutes. If you simply want to concur with somebody else, feel free to do that. Our first speaker is John Zweig, to be followed by Jennifer Landsman. So I'll start with John, and Jennifer, you'll be on deck.
Hello? As you probably know, the next gen has had the result of concentrating the aircraft flight routes into a very narrow path, which happens to be over Palo Alto. This is a feature because it reduces the number of people who are exposed to airplane noise. It's good. This is a bug if you happen to be one of the poor sots who lives under that path. It's a big enough issue for people who live in Palo Alto that we're really grateful that the city has devoted resources to it over the last few years. The bottom line is that Palo Alto shouldn't bear an unfair burden, a disproportionate burden of the noise. The noise should be shared in some way. And this is a kind of one of the bottom lines of where I think we ought to be headed with this. I'm thinking that it's an active enough issue that it might be worth considering an ongoing committee, perhaps a citizens advisory committee, or having it be a standing item, a standing agenda item of one of the committees of the city council to keep momentum going in this, because we've made some progress, but the airplanes are still flying pretty much the way they were. So bottom line is some kind of ongoing body that considers this at a regular intervals. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker is Jennifer Landsman, to be followed by Jay Wally. I hope I pronounced that right. Jennifer?
Thank you. Committee members, there are mighty interests who will work very hard to keep the concentration of low-flying jets over our city as is. When the FAA responds, these discussions will advance, for better or for worse. I urge the city to establish a high-level goal of getting more equitable distribution of traffic, and to do so by first eliminating noise with routes which can enter the bay at the highest altitudes. I believe that the FAA can assist with this because designing optimal routes, if doable, is not contrary to their interests to have a sustainable system. They would not be working on this if it hardly mattered to their agency. To negotiate the path to solutions, the city must engage a lead advisor and highly specialized FAA experts. I ask that you investigate also what other cities are doing. For example, Culver City retained Barbara Lichtman, a renowned environmental aviation attorney, in the outreach to the FAA on behalf of her client. If Ms. Lichtman needs a noise analysis, she retains a noise expert. And when she needs an expert to engage with the FAA on procedures and routes, she engages the firm, for example, Williams Aviation, which has at the helm former air traffic organization senior executives. The firm Williams also has extensive experience in bringing communities together on projects and is very knowledgeable of Bay Area airspace from past projects. Mr. Tom Kaman at Williams has been at FAA meetings on the current Bay Area initiative as well, advising Portola Valley. Moreover, these air traffic organization experts are on record that assessments of a route that enters the bay at higher altitude farther south is the only way to get real solutions for the Mid-Peninsula. Neither you, staff, or our lay citizens can replace the highly specialized expertise required in deeper discussions with the FAA, which are necessary to determine and implement the right solutions. Thank you.
All right, we're off to a good start. Both the first two speakers didn't use all of their time, so we're moving along. Jay Whaley, I hope I
Jay
pronounced
Whaley, thank you.
Whaley, thank you
Yes.
for correcting me.
My
And
wife
the next-
Sally and I have lived in the Crescent Park area neighborhood now for a number of years, and we've reported our concerns about low-flying aircraft. I understand there have now been 3.1 million reports in 1 year, and we've been part of that reporting. I won't go over the details of what we said, except I invite you to come over to our home on Sunday evenings and sit outside on it with our barbecue, and you'll see how often our conversation is interrupted. But we could also wave to the people as they're landing in San Francisco. I would like to comment on this report that you have tonight, and that I got off the internet, that you're using about your the recommendations. It's report number ID 8143. That's part of that 112-page. I just have two comments to make that I'd like to recommend that you continue, because I totally agree with what you say. It says the staff recommends that the City Council reaffirm its position and seek a seat on the Select Committee's proposed ad hoc committee. When the Select Committee met and gave their recommendations, the committee was made up of 12 members and 12 alternates. Palo Alto had one alternate, had no one on the as a member. Santa Cruz had 4 people as members and 4 as alternates. That's 8. Palo Alto had 1. And that's how this recommendation came by. And I think it's very important that we understand that, because recommendation that is in your report on page 3 says that the city's position aligned with number 4, and that is to design an entirely new route that takes advantage of non-residential areas. The southerly arrivals, as it's been reported, there's northwesterly and southerly arrivals, and the southern route that is proposed here, which came out of the Select Committee, comes right over the Menlo Waypoint, which is exactly almost where we live. And so I would recommend that you strongly push for what you say here, that the city position align itself with number 4 of this recommendation. Thank you. I have also submitted my report in a letter, which you've gotten sent to you.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Mark Landsman, to be followed by, I believe it's Andy Robin. So Mark.
Mark Sky Policy. Thank you for your effort in writing the staff report, which, however, contains several critical factual errors and misleading statements, which is unfortunate and uncharacteristic. Because of the short speaking time, I will only give one example. In regard to westerly arrivals, which account for the majority of noise and emissions which are bestowed on us in the middle of the night, the report states that city staff is effectively aligned with a position which essentially says that Asian flights have to fly at low altitudes in the middle of the night over Palo Alto because they could otherwise run out of fuel. This is quite simply not true. The central element of the deployment of the new next-gen system by the FAA is to allow planes as much as possible to fly on the most direct path from origin to destination while they are at cruising altitude. The direct path from Beijing and from other leading Asian points of origin to SFOs such as Tokyo, Hong Kong, Singapore, etc., is such that the shortest path and the most direct path from this origin approaches SFO from the northwest. No airline flight has ever run out of fuel while crossing the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean. Rain or shine, the airlines that make the trip from Asia to the US have plenty of fuel reserve. But if for some strange reason they would run out of fuel or be close to be running out of fuel on the way to SFO, the very last thing they would do as they approach the airport from the northwest is to take a sightseeing trip down to the peninsula and over Palo Alto. This makes no sense. In defense of the city staff, the statements that flights from Asia have to cross Palo Alto does not come from the staff itself, but rather has been given to staff by various unnamed speakers. But herein lies the rub. Palo Alto has been spoon-fed similar nonsensical excuses for why SFO's noise emissions have to be moved to our city for more than 17 years. Strangely, no reason was ever found for transferring to us any of SFO's $800 million in annual revenues. The reason we retained an excellent consulting team is that we should stop accepting such nonsense. In this instance, and for the report as a whole, a single phone call to Jack Freitag would have sufficed to unveil the truth. Several of the other misstatements in the city staff report are equally or even more salient to an understanding of our current situation and the need for urgent action for which we have repeatedly pressed. Sky Policy will also provide a more comprehensive response to the city staff report to council by the beginning of next week. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Andy Robin, to be followed by Joel Hayflick.
Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I've been living here for 31 years, and any assertions that flights have to fly 747s over my house at 12:30, 1 o'clock, and 1:30 in the morning are obviously wrong, because they haven't been doing that for 30 years. I do know that they're extremely annoying. My wife often has a hard time sleeping through it, wakes up, and then is awake for a couple hours trying to go back to sleep. We used to entertain in our backyard, and as another person said, we don't do that anymore because it's too noisy out there. Jets going over all the time. And so it just seems like an abusive thing that's been done to our city by the FAA. So I guess I noticed that the council took a huge amount of action over high-speed rail and over the notion that trestles would be running along Alma Street to elevate the trains. And the council went crazy, and there's been all kinds of action, and with other cities. Yeah, I'd ask you to do something like that on this issue too, because this is another terrible quality of life disturber. It's really pretty awful for our whole city. So please redouble your efforts, put more into it. If you don't squeak loud, it ain't gonna happen. Everybody's gonna have to hear lots of loud complaints everywhere, And as one person suggested, bring on the experts like was done with high-speed rail, and fight hard. Thanks for your help and commitment.
Next speaker, Joel Hayflick, to be followed by Tony Rath. And I should have mentioned it earlier. We generally do have a policy of not encouraging applause, cheers, boos, et cetera, just to make sure that no matter what somebody's perspective is, they don't feel uncomfortable. It's just a standard practice of decorum for the council and committees. Just wanted to mention that.
Hello, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Joel Hayflick. My wife and I live in Midtown Palo Alto. We've lived here for 10 years. I grew up in this area, moved to Seattle, and then came back 10 years ago. Every day, over 300 jets fly over my house. That's low and loud, every single day. That's only the ones to San Francisco. There's also jets flying in and out to San Jose. They fly out to La Hui over the house from San Jose. They also fly out of Oakland and go and turn west to Hawaii as well. So that's an underrepresentation, the 300 jets, and that diagram right there. Anyway, the chronic long-term effect of aircraft noise from low and loud jet aircraft on humans is well documented. This is not a problem that we can just continue to work on day after year. This has a negative impact on the chronic well-being, on the well-being of the population, not only in Palo Alto, but in the rest of the area. So I concur with some of the comments and suggestions that were made by Jennifer and the Sky Posse group in terms of bringing in the experts, getting involved in not only the SFO roundtable, but also the San Jose proposed roundtable, which I've heard is also being looked at as a means to get local civic groups involved, regional communities involved, and become a proponent of a regional solution, be on the forefront of a regional solution for Palo Alto and the region. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Tony Rath. If I'm mispronouncing any of these names, please feel free to correct me, followed by Darlene Yapley.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Tony. I'm a longtime resident of Mountain View, and I'm concerned about some parts of the proposals regarding airplane noise that are being put forth here, specifically the parts about directing airplane traffic around Palo Alto and instead having it pass over Los Altos and Mountain View, your neighbors. So these are basically the same parameters that annoy residents here, so they're going to be okay in Mountain View and in Los Altos? I don't think so. The repeated claim that traffic over Los Altos and Mountain View would travel at much higher altitudes is simply not true. It's baloney. It's much the same parameters. I would like to ask that you instead work with neighboring communities instead of against them. So together we can bring change that will actually improve the situation for everyone. Yes, everyone. The unusual physics of airplane noise means that how airplanes fly, the speed and the use of flats and slaps and so on, makes a bigger difference than tweaks in the altitude. We should consider that. These changes, these things have changed a few years ago, and the FAA is working on them as a result of the Select Committee's work. Let's see what those improvements are before we start pushing things to our neighbors. The committee could also suggest that SFO levy landing fees scaled to airplane noise, and that could address things like the Airbus whine. The committee should ask Congress to give the FAA a general mandate to reduce noise. This is sorely lacking. That could have also addressed things like the Airbus whine. The committee could ask Congress to ask the FAA to establish a residents advisory board to NextGen to parallel the industry advisory board so that the residents have a voice in airplane noise concerns. Working against your neighbor is not a one-way street. Communities south of Palo Alto are already experiencing high levels of airplane noise. Palo Alto could easily find itself in a receiving position if Sunnyvale and Mountain View start advocating to send south flow traffic that is currently going to San Jose over Palo Alto. In a situation where everyone works against everyone, nobody wins. Let's not go there. Mountain View and Palo Alto have a history of working well together. Let's keep doing it. We are stronger together. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And Darlene Yapley, to be followed by Vicki Reich.
First, thank you to the Policy and Services Committee and staff for your leadership to help remediate airplane noise for our city. We appreciate your attention to this important topic. I would like to build a little bit on the report that was done. We are positive towards reaffirming the city's position to reduce airplane noise. I'd like to build on that with, we'd like it to be updated to feature the highest priority items from the Select Committee and Roundtable reports. Second, to include community feedback, as you'll be hearing tonight, and that everything be reviewed for technical accuracy by experts. Another piece of that is that we should address the misperception that Palo Alto wants to move noise to other cities and focus on a regional solution. And we believe this reaffirmation of the city's positions should be updated before the FAA's response is made public and before council goes on summer break so that we're ready for any response that does come. And my colleague Vicki will add on some additional items.
Well, actually, we could just, we'll finish 3 minutes for you, and then we'll go on to Vicki.
We're good. We're good. We're good.
Okay, then we'll go on to Vicki. All right, next speaker.
We're good.
Go ahead, Vicki.
So, continuing on, I'm going to talk about representation, noise monitors, the city's response to the FAA timing, and one last tiny little request. So, with regard to representation, with professional advice, and I stress that, let's seek representation on any airplane noise body whose actions could impact Palo Alto, including those recommended by the Select Committee, either ad hoc or permanent, or both. And please reach out to Anna Eshu, the SFO Roundtable, and the new group San Jose Airport might be forming to address reverse flow and arrivals. With regard to noise monitors, let's get professional advice, again, about installing noise monitors. Noise data properly defined, gathered, and analyzed seems like a good idea. The city's response to the FAA. Once the FAA's response is publicly available, we ask Policy and Services to respond quickly and effectively via a document created with both community input and expert advice so the city can act. And timing, we ask that these items be moved forward before you recess for the summer. And last, we ask the city to host a working session with citizens and experts to answer questions and to foster policy alignment. And thank you, all three. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Vicki. And our next speaker is Karen Porter, to be followed by George Block.
Thank you. I echo the comments that everybody has made about the importance of addressing the noise that has seems to have invaded our community and the adverse health consequences that result from that. But I do want to emphasize, I think, the adverse health consequences that are associated with emissions from jet exhaust that I think are being overlooked. Particulate matter from plane exhaust is recognized as arguably posing perhaps the most serious health risk, according to a 2015 report published by the Airport Cooperative Research Program, which was sponsored by the FAA. Particulate matter is associated with serious respiratory, cardiovascular illnesses, and premature mortality. Oh, sorry. Historically, the FAA has only looked at emissions that are in what's known as the landing and takeoff cycle, which is 3,000 feet above ground level and closer to airports. but other modeling studies have shown health impacts farther from airports and at higher altitudes of between 3,000 and 5,000 feet. So, of course, which are most of the flights impacting Palo Alto these days. So I think it's important. I would ask the committee to include in our statement that it's important to emphasize the FAA to focus on the health effects of emissions. The FAA has tools that can model these effects as part of, it's called the AEDT tool, that can easily model emissions, and we encourage the city to require this testing. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Karen. And our next speaker is George Block, to be followed by Robert Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. I'm here basically to support what's been said already and ask the council to continue its support of trying to resolve this issue. I can say little other except that maybe number 3, medical marijuana, would become a high priority should the noise continue.
George Block. Oh, sorry, that was George, my mistake. Robert Finn, to be followed by Robert Holbrook.
Thank you. My wife and I have lived here since 1982. For 32 years, we treasured our home for its quiet and convenient location. Airplane noise didn't exist for us. Then suddenly, in 2014, we found ourselves besieged by planes flying loudly over us at low altitudes and clearly indifferent to any personal needs of residents. No explanation came from any official source, but we somehow learned that a new landing pattern for SFO, labeled NextGen, had just been instituted. There could be no other plausible explanation. We were not the only ones affected, and appeals and hearings ensued, and ensued, and ensued, with no steps taken toward any alleviation. In a draft report from a major committee issued last October, I found the paragraph, and I quote precisely, "Some have proposed returning to pre-NextGen procedures. The draft report rejects that option summarily for the reason that FAA was required by law to adopt new and advanced technology." This seems to say that Congress required FAA to make things new, even if doing so would make them disastrously worse. I'm dubious that even our present Congress would accept such a demand. Should I discard my simple kitchen can opener, which works faultlessly, and replace it by an elaborate device that makes a lot of noise but won't open my cans? And if the system really has to be new and expensive, please at least get it changed from NextGen. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Robert Holbrook, to be followed by Carrie Yarkin.
My name is Robert Holbrook. I'm a resident of Mountain View. I used to live in Palo Alto. Like one of the previous speakers, I moved up to Seattle. Had a very bad experience with airplanes there. I rented a house on a lovely sunny day. A week later, the weather shifted and stayed shifted for 9 months. And I had airplanes over my house for 9 months straight. When I moved back, I resolved I am not going to do that again. I did the research and prioritized airplane noise as number 1, and I moved to Mountain View. I didn't move to Palo Alto because there are airplanes up here. I believe that people making the most important decision of their lives should have a reasonable assurance that a flight path is not going to be moved over them. And that is what you are being asked to endorse today. Your proposal, the proposal before you is to create more points for aircraft to use while entering SFO. There's currently 1 point. This point centralizes all arrival aircraft and noise over Palo Alto. It also suggests redirecting flights from the south to the east. What these translate to, when you peel the onion on these proposals, is a suggestion to introduce a new waypoint called Dumba, another waypoint called Rock Me. Your consultants did an analysis of this. Based on their own analysis, there's going to be a 6 to 15 decibel increase in air traffic over Mountain View City Hall, where I live. A 6 decibel increase, the way this is measured, would translate to the same noise generated by 4 times as many airplanes as we have now. With NextGen, these airplanes are likely to be concentrated into a corridor, as some folks have said, and this is clearly shifting noise away from Palo Alto to a new area in Mountain View. That's the Rock Me Dumba approach. There's another approach which is called Faith. That would involve moving airplanes over Milpitas. The idea of using the length of the bay is a great idea, except for the catch that airplanes have to get to the bay. And we need to be figuring out how the airplanes are going to get to the bay and what impact that's going to have on the communities underneath them. And the impact that your folks have come up with for Mountain View is very significant. Airplane noise is caused by several factors, and I think it's one of the least intuitive things in the physical universe. The power laws associated with airplane, the sound energy generated by airplane, mean that it scales at the 6th power or the 8th power of the speed of airplanes, meaning that a slight decrease in the speed of an airplane can cause as much reduction in the sound of the airplane as 1,000 feet of altitude. The FAA is now starting to pay attention to this as a result of the Select Committee's actions, and I'm hopeful that by changing the way that airplanes fly, how airplanes fly, we're going to see a significant reduction in the noise that's being generated by them. Probably perhaps a bigger reduction than where the airplanes are flying and the small changes in the ground path that they cover. In some areas, there have been big changes. Los Altos saw a big change. Capitola, Santa Cruz, a big change. Over Palo Alto, as you approach the Menlo Waypoint, the change gets vanishingly small. Let's give the FAA a chance to address the issues as they have led us to believe they will, and see where we are before we talk about moving the noise to another community. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Carrie Yarkin, to be followed by Amy Adams.
Good evening, council members. I want to contrast what he just said, that you are Palo Alto City Council members. My parents would not have moved here 65 years ago. As you know, I'm a native Palo Alton. They would never have moved here. We would never have put our stake in the ground here if there was going to be the arrivals zone into SFO. I am considering moving. I have 3 siblings in town. It's horrible. And Lydia Koo, I just want to remind you, I went to your coffee and the planes were flying over. Tom DuBose, 3 years ago when you ran, you came to my house for coffee. The planes were flying over. You could not hear Eric Filseth speak. There were only 20 of us in that small contained room. That was 3 years ago. I'm pretty sure 3 years ago. Okay, so I don't have to go on, but I would like some peace. I would really, really like to be able to sit in my beautiful landscape backyard and enjoy the sun and be able to sit there. I cannot do that now. That is a bottom line livability issue for me and my neighbors. And we live in Midtown, but it's Palo Alto. You can listen to Mountain View. You can listen to Los Altos. You can listen to the East Palo Alto. You are Palo Alto City Council members. Okay, another issue I'm a little concerned about is the fine particulate matter. I have 2 teenagers. I do not like to see the planes over my house doing their turn. I'm right directly under them, thinking of the fine particulate matter affecting their health. For chronic health problems, I went to the sleep apnea clinic because now I have sleep apnea, and my doctor said that I went to for this. He said, oh, I just had someone else from Palo Alto this week. So it is affecting us. particularly Palo Altans. I also have some cardiac arrhythmias, which I think stress, all of this has all contributed to it. So my recommendations to you are, don't let Anna Eshoo off the hook. I saw saw her statements with Bill Johnson, and she was saying, oh no, it's a new administration. I think you have to read very carefully into, or work very carefully with her, and don't let her off the hook. Have her meet with Nancy Pelosi. They get lots of things through Congress, or they at least get, their voices heard. She can speak with Dianne Feinstein, the mayor of San Francisco. They're not that far away. The airport director, she's a block away. I don't know. I've been sending her letters, as many people here have been doing, and I've been calling her. Nothing, we're still where we were 3 years ago or worse. And also I agree with the standing committee. This is not just come here one time. You've got a lot of experts here. I would also agree with what Jennifer Lansman said about we need legal expertise in this aviation area. I wrote to the city attorney. I invited her to some of the select committee meetings. I had a conversation, I think, back and forth with email. I don't think our city attorney, to be honest with you, or our city has that expertise that we're going to need, because the noise has been moved on to us. Now everybody else doesn't want the noise. I agree with them, but we are the recipients of the noise. And the seat on the select committee, the whole last select committee was a complete wash for Palo Alto. And to have one alternate, it was stacked from the beginning against us. We are the ones who are suffering. We have the 4 lines coming over our homes, 300 planes a day. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And again, we do encourage, regardless of your feelings about a speaker, we do encourage modest response, if anything. Amy Adams, to be followed by Bill Murphy.
My name is Amy Adams Dreckmeyer, and despite my family's connection to this chamber, I come fairly infrequently to these type of meetings. I came to oppose tasers. I came to this discussion about basement dewatering, and I'm here for this issue. And the reason is I feel passionate about all of those issues personally, and I feel that they affect quality of life and our community. You might be interested to know that I've actually never reported airplanes over my house, despite the fact that they're coming over on an average about every 3 minutes. The reason this is I'm actually extremely busy. I work as a physician. I'm usually at work from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. I get up very early, and I actually go to bed pretty late. I have a young child. My husband's very busy. We have a lot of extracurricular activities going on. I need to sleep with earplugs. When I go to bed, I am woken up frequently after 1 a.m., and I'm awakened again before around 5, 6 a.m. It's intolerable to me. I am gone most of the day. I actually live with my mother, who's here in the front row. Her great passion is actually gardening. She has no passion for that right now. She's actually pretty depressed about it. She literally is sitting outside, and there's maybe a minute where there's no noise. I absolutely agree that we need to do unto others as we'd have them do unto you. I don't think that a narrow path of airplanes over one community should just be shifted 5 or 10 miles to another community. I don't think really anybody in this room really advocates that. I think what they would like to do is have the quality of life that they purchased in our community. I happen to live in a craftsman home. It happens to have no air conditioning. I don't think people really need that in California, and so the noise is just that much louder for us because of open windows, because of insulation, all of that, and I'm sure many, many other people have those type of old-fashioned California homes. I think that the people in my family who live in rural Michigan and paid about $100,000 for their home, if they were to come visit me on my tiny little house on this little lot and look up and see that it looks like I live next to the airport, would think that I am insane to live here. Is that what we want for our community? For people to laugh at us and go, what a joke, you snob, you live there and it's shitty. Sorry to be rude, but that's how I feel right now. And like I said, I come here very infrequently, but it's really disturbing my ability to even work because I can't get any sleep.
Thank you for your comments. And Next speaker is Bill Murphy, to be followed by Mary Jo Fremont.
I live currently about 5 blocks into Mountain View past San Antonio Road. But I grew up in Palo Alto, and I lived here from 1959 until buying my house in Mountain View in 1988. I can tell people here who believe, I'll get to why the change happened in a moment, that Palo Alto never had airplane noise and it got moved onto Palo Alto, that's not true, and it's never been true. The airplane noise has been roughly equal what I'm experiencing now in Mountain View, when I have hundreds of overflights over my house every day. What changed? Okay, I'm in that swooping green line there. See the sharp orange line coming up from the south? NextGen didn't move sound over you, or didn't move airplanes over you. What it did was it concentrated them over a narrow corridor, and to stay on a narrow corridor, they started gunning their engines to conform with the corridor. Gunning your engines, calling, that's a very noisy thing. They'd hit their speed brakes, that's a noisy thing. They'd fly low. They weren't behaving nice. But the very nature of this problem is that you have this bright orange line. I'm in the big scatter of the green line, and I have constant buzzing of mosquito-like airplanes over my house 24/7. Always been since 1988. No change. And then during reverse flow for 5 months every year, I get extraordinary noise like Palo Altans, and I feel your pain because it's real, experienced with that orange line that's going over Churchill and Rinconada Park, because the reverse flow is flying underneath. It's a San Jose arrival that goes up in a horseshoe, flips a UE at Mountain View. Sometimes it gets as far north as Palo Alto, but it flies underneath these SFO arrivals. So you're getting 3,000 footers. For 5 months out of the year, Mountain View gets 2,000 footers. And they're really making a turn, so they're always gunning their engines. So the problem is that NextGen created this conforming line. It consolidated and it made in a much more painful, non-dispersed way what you're experiencing. So see how I get dispersion? Of that orange line, actually it turns out, you see 30%, about a fourth, about 8%, vectors right, and it's hiding in that green swoop because they got to kill time to get to the bay. I actually get about a fourth of your traffic killing time vectoring right. You can almost see it. See that little bit of orange on the outside edge of the green swoosh? Like that. So the solution is somehow dispersion. Nobody moved planes over you. They consolidated or made in a concatenated fashion noise over you. Your pain's real. You've always had tons of airplanes here. I grew up here. I grew up when the P-3s were flying out of Moffett with nuclear depth charges, waiting to drop them on Russian subs that were off the coast because there was a 6-minute launch time. So that's my point. Don't beggar thy neighbor by presuming to put any of one neighbor's problem onto Mountain View and Los Altos, which suffer significantly already.
Thank you for your comments. And I just wanted to ask if there are any other speaker cards, please get them in now. We're getting some more in late. We'll allow those speakers to make their comments. But after this speaker, we'll close comment submissions. Mary Jo Fremont, next speaker, just so you're ready, is Mark Millett.
So thank you for giving me another opportunity to talk about airplane noise. So first, I think it's a great positive step to see the Policy and Services Committee involved. So thank you, the city, for stepping it up. You need to keep going. It's not just one meeting, so I hope you will continue to be engaged. We're all waiting for this FAA response. It has been 6 months. In any place that I know of, I think people would have been fired not to provide any response to the public that involves, hundreds of thousands of citizens. 6 months in total silence from the FAA. This is, I think, unacceptable. But what the city should do is, I don't think, send another letter to the FAA, but better to prepare its response to that FAA response. And I have 3 suggestions for that. First, you really need to understand what is important for Palo Alto. What are the really critical issues and what the positions of the city are on these issues. It's like in any negotiation, you should know your trade-offs and you should know your walk-away positions. This is no different here. And the second suggestion is use data. There is so much misinformation, so many fake news, so many misperceptions. Palo Alto has never I can't speak for the city, but I'll speak as a resident. Palo Alto has never said that we'll move surfer to another city. These narrow corridors should never exist. But the fact that now 60% of the SFO arrivals are within 2 miles of the Menlo waypoint, that's data that can be proven with all the flight data information. And by the way, it's not Palo Alto's traffic, it's SFO's traffic. So we don't own that airplane traffic. It just happened that over time, and especially with NextGen, it came to Palo Alto. So use the data and use the facts. The good news is the problem is well documented because all these flight data information exists. So don't rely on opinions. And then the third recommendation is, engage with others. Engage with other cities, engage with many educated citizens who have spent thousands of hours to try to really understand the problem, and I think many of them are very talented. Engage with the San Francisco Roundtable, the fact that 60% of the arrivals are within 2 miles of the Menlo waypoint, but there is not one monitoring noise station from SFO around this 2-mile circle. It's unbelievable to me. That's data, not an opinion. So thank you for your help, but I really believe that now is the time to really work on what Palo Alto matters and engaging with others as well. And by the way, engage with the San Francisco airport. They're designing their new landing system, which will be GPS-based. And yet again, the cities that are most affected are not even consulted. This is another data point. That's not an opinion. The reality, if you design a new landing system, you need to talk to people who are going to be affected with arrivals. Thank you.
Mark Millett, to be followed by Beth Erickson.
Thank you for your time today. I would like to echo everything that's been said earlier today, but one thing that hasn't been brought up is the property values in places that have historically been flight path concentrated. Those are 10 to 15% lower than they are in other neighborhoods. And if we allow the FAA to continue flying over our houses, I'm in Mountain View, Los Altos border. I've got San Francisco and San Jose flying simultaneously over my house. If we allow that to happen, people are going to move out, and that's going to reduce the value of the property. If we reduce the value of the property, that affects city budgets permanently. So this is not small things. This is 10% value on an average $2 million house in Palo Alto is $200,000 of valuation. So this is a lot of economic effect long-term on people's assets, people's retirements, and the city. So, you know, I also have terrible problems sleeping and am woken up at all hours, and there just is no justification for what's happened other than the FAA has chosen to punish us. We've all been here for this tremendous effort that everyone put in, Joe Simidian put in to run this whole roundtable in this room, all the complaints, yet a 2 to 3 week response period has come back with nothing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Next speaker, Beth Erickson, to be followed by our final speaker, Nelson Ng.
Hi, I'm Beth Erickson, and I'm your neighbor from
Oh,
Mountain
could
View.
you speak into the mic? I want to make sure we can hear you. You can move it down if you need to, whatever's comfortable for you.
I'm Beth Erickson, and I'm short. Okay, I'm your neighbor, and a lot of people think that San Antonio divides Mountain View from Palo Alto, and that's not quite true, because some of Palo Alto's on the other side of San Antonio, like the Toyota dealer. So we're kind of like really meshed together. So we're talking about airplane noise, so it doesn't just disappear at the border. Currently, I live in the Montaloma neighborhood, which is right next to Google X. I have Surfer, Bodega, San Jose Reverse Flow. We have the Surf little planes. We have Oceanic. We have San Jose departures going, to Japan. And so, these are some of the same things that you have. And so it's really a regional problem. And I see all these cities, spending big bucks, to get all their consultants and things like that to fix it in their own little province. But we're all in this together. So I really, really would hope that you would reach out to the other cities, reach out to Mountain View, even if they don't reach out to you. I don't know, my city council sometimes, but we've got to solve this together because this is a regional problem. I mean, if we could get these vortex mufflers on the planes and the A320s, that would help significantly. I just came back from my daughter's graduation, and I was embarrassed to realize I was on an A320, and I thought, oh my gosh, who am I bothering? Because these go over my house, and this whine it drives me nuts. It wakes me up at night, and I'm like, I know that part is $3,000, and Congress can't tell them that they have to put this part on. But in certain cities in Europe, you can't land a plane unless you have the vortex muffler. So as a regional thing, if you get together with other cities and you're going to spend money on consultants, pool it. Do it together. Don't reinvent the wheel for each city. Please work together. Thank you.
All right, and looks like we have our last speaker, unless was there one final speaker card on this topic? We'll be happy to hear it. Just want to make sure nobody else is going to put in a speaker card. Everybody set? Great. Nelson Ng.
Hi, my name is Nelson Ng, and I live at 1260 Emerson Street for the last 20 years with my family. And during the course of the last 20 years, I've noticed that the plane noise has significantly increased in our area. It's to a point that's unbearable. Echoing some of the speakers, what they said, I've been waking up in the middle of the night, sometime 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning. And then also, as some of you guys know, that I also like to practice my Tai Chi meditation in the garden. A lot of time in the morning, like 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, the plane will constantly coming, not one after another, between 5 to 7 a.m. And this is just really impacting our quality of life. And this is not just happening to me, but then also many of the people that I spoke with in Palo Alto. I have not been that involved with the issues or getting all the data, but then I have lived through a lot of this pain for the last number of years. And I really think that the Palo Alto need to step up and get a seat on the table, discuss with other cities around us to figure out what is the right course of action we need to do. This is just not acceptable the way we're doing it right now. So I try to make it quick, and then hopefully I will listen to you guys, what you guys going to plan for us.
Thank you very much for your comments. And our very last speaker is Juan Alonso.
Thank you for listening to my comments. My name is Juan Alonso. I'm a neighbor of Stanford and Palo Alto, and I'm a professor of aeronautics and astronautics at Stanford University. I've also served in the FAA Advisory Council, and I currently serve in the FAA Advisory Council for Research, Engineering, and Development for the Office of Energy and Environment. So I'm pretty well informed in all matters related to aviation, environmental impact, aircraft design, and various other things. I've heard lots of interesting things here today, and sometimes you hear facts that are sort of misleading and somewhat incorrect. So I'll warn you against listening to everything that's here, but rather talk to experts who actually know the answers to some of these topics. I think Jennifer Landsman had mentioned this topic. The first step in solving the situation that's affecting Palo Alto and neighboring communities is to minimize the noise that is emitted and that reaches the ground wherever it is, whether it's Palo Alto or other communities. Once you have chosen the proper routes that are safe and that increase capacity to our airport, but at the same time minimize the noise and environmental impact, you have to equitatively distribute the noise that remains, and there will be some noise that actually remains. So don't be fooled into believing that there is an actual solution that allows us to fly in and out of the San Francisco airport with zero noise to any of the neighboring communities. That's not engineering and physically feasible today. But an equitative distribution of the noise is something that should be achieved, and not a single community or parts of a single community should burden or shoulder the entire burden of having the entire noise footprint. The FAA has the burden to discover new methods and new approaches that, in addition to increasing safety and minimizing fuel burn, which is typically their mandate, decrease the noise over the neighboring communities. Particulate matter is also a concern that some people have mentioned. Now, with that said, we have no choice but to work with the FAA, because ultimately they are going to be the ones implementing the solutions that may benefit our community. I'm sorry if I go over time, but
You still have about a minute left.
Okay. Working with the FAA is really critical, so you have to engage at all levels, roundtables, SFO, FAA, political and community activism in order to keep pressure on the FAA in order to do the right thing. It is important that we not only as Palo Altans work with the FAA, but also with the neighboring communities, because the FAA will never come back and implement a different solution that satisfies Palo Alto, but makes the same issue arise in a different community, and they're back to square zero. They said it very clearly, and it's not something they're going to be doing. So we have to work with the other communities to come up with not a local solution, but a regional solution that is satisfactory to all. Everybody will have to shoulder a little bit of pain, but certainly the situation can be improved for many of the communities that have the large burden at the moment. And then I think sorry.
You can go ahead and finish your last statement,
if you don't
please.
mind, just 30 more seconds. So last but not least, I think you can see that the problem is actually real. You know, whereas we may have had a number of airplanes overflying Palo Alto in the past, their routes were much more dispersed, such that no small section of the population of Palo Alto was being impacted disproportionately. So the problem is very real. The citizens of Palo Alto obviously are voting with their feet by coming here to let you know that this is a very important issue. And I do agree with some of the speakers that even though the wheels of government move very slowly, and I'm talking about the FAA now, you have the ability, through various different means, to pressure in various different points in order to achieve some results more quickly. I do think that ensuring that the city of Palo Alto is properly advised by experts who know about these things is a very important issue, and I encourage you to make sure that you do have input from these sources. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. And thank you, everybody who came to speak. All of those opinions that you've shared, I think, are well heard and many points well taken. And so we'll try and make sure that all of those thoughts and opinions are respected and taken into consideration. I'll turn now to staff. If you have a presentation or any introduction beyond that for the topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, the staff does not have a formal presentation. I would just, with your indulgence, just restate a couple of things. So first of all, really thanks to everybody who came out tonight. This item really came onto the committee's agenda because council members asked me to place it on the Policy and Services Committee agenda for the express purpose of not losing sight of all of the work and the conversations and the concern that have been expressed and building up in the community over the past 2-3 years. Not to let the select committee's work just sort of fade into the background, even though we've been in this kind of awkward interregnum here between the select committee finishing its report and it being sent off to the FAA in Washington, and where are things. And so I do think that your desire to, and not in a token sense at all, to reaffirm the city's commitment and the council's commitment to staying focused on this issue, to restate the city's position. And obviously you've heard enough comments that both say we're, no pun intended, all over the map a little bit in some of our recommendations. I guess we should have a next-gen strategy for our own positions that focus them a little bit more clearly. No pun intended there either. But to be effective, ultimately, we're going to have to be as clear as possible, and that's one of the things that you wanted to accomplish. You also wanted to have the opportunity to make it clear that our council very much understands that this is a regional issue and we have to work collaboratively with others, that the city's position is not and has never been about pushing everything away from Palo Alto. And I just would last say a number of things that people said were really great. I thought that the handout that you got was very helpful. I thought that the last speaker's points, some of the things that were sort of the most simply stated, I think are guideposts that we ought to use as we revisit this with both the committee and the council. I mean, about just being clear, minimize the noise, equitably distribute the noise, acknowledge that the problem is real, and that being realistic about the role of the FAA and that we've got to work with the FAA. So I would say, we're here to, listen to the committee. To what extent do you want to sharpen or refine any of the position points that the city has? Some of that I think you could do tonight. Others I would think you need to direct us to take some of the comments and find a way to come back. And I know that there are recommendations about getting some of this done really before the council goes on break. And I think that that's important, but I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that almost no matter what we do, once the FAA report comes out, we're going to be responding to that report and positioning and looking at our repositioning our positions and stuff to be most effective. So those are our comments, and look forward to at least your conversation and then where you want to go from here tonight.
Thank you to City Manager for that. Before I turn it over to my colleagues on the committee, I just wanted to offer a couple of framing thoughts about this, picking up on what the City Manager has just said. Several of us on council did say we really want to see this come to the Policy and Services Committee because there's been this holding pattern. Again, sorry for another pun, but there's been this waiting, what's going on, where a lot of people in the community in Palo Alto and in other communities haven't really seen clarity about what is the city's position. And in that vacuum, some people are concerned, well, is the city still being proactive on this issue? Is the city still listening to us? And in neighboring cities, there is also a perception often, and I think we've heard some of it tonight, that Palo Alto is interested in taking our problem and simply shifting it to other communities, which I agree with the city manager. I don't think that's ever been our position. And so for our own residents and for residents and city leaders in neighboring communities, we felt that it was very important to be clear in the context of the ongoing work, in light of the reports from the roundtable and also from the select committee, to be clear about what our position is, so that that's very transparent and very open, and that there's not just a vacuum with which where we can speculate about where does Palo Alto stand, and we felt that that's important. So I hope that that's part of what we'll really try to clarify tonight is where's the city's position in the current context. I think we can maybe talk about a few audiences that we want to be clear to. As I've just mentioned, one is our own residents, another is neighboring communities, and also our representatives, specifically Representative Anna Eshoo, and the FAA itself. And so I hope that over the course of our discussion tonight, we can work as a committee and working with staff, clarify what next steps we want to take as a city and what we want to recommend to the council for next steps to take as a city to communicate effectively with the residents, neighboring cities, Representative Eshoo, and with the FAA. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues if they want to kick off the conversation about where we should go.
So my understanding is that when you and Chair, as well as Council Vice Mayor, Mayor, and Council Member Fine went to Washington, you met with the FAA, and it'd be really nice to hear, what came out from that, what you can bring home, so that audience, our citizens here are aware. And also, I see in the audience San Francisco Airport's noise complaint manager. I was wondering, was he supposed to speak also today? Was that something that was, I read it in here somewhere, so.
We invited Bert, and thank you so much, Bert, for coming. But he's only here to respond to council questions and concerns.
So can we first hear from you, and then maybe I have some other questions?
Sure, I'll mention a couple of things about our trip to Washington. So as Lydia Koo just pointed out, several of us from the city, both staff, are paid lobbyists for the city, and several of us on council went to Washington in March. We sat down with the FAA, who, I will say, the members of the FAA who we met with were quite generous with their time on a snowy day in DC, and they came in even when most people in the office were not there because of the snow. And what we heard from them was they're working on responding to both the SFO roundtable recommendations, and they're also working on responding to the regional select committee recommendations. They've taken the combined 108 recommendations from those two bodies, and they're preparing a report. Hopefully we'll have that report, they said, by the summer. Now it's looking like we might have it within the next few weeks. Originally we were hoping to have it some time ago, but at least we heard that they are working on it. As was mentioned earlier, the gears of government do sometimes work slowly. They also mentioned a couple of other things, that they are creating kind of a working group within the FAA to discuss how to deal with airplane noise differently, how to deal with noise differently, because there hasn't really been a modernization of how they deal with noise in a very long time, and we've seen the results of that. And one of the recommendations from the select committee was to really change the process by which noise is evaluated by the FAA, because the current system is really inadequate. So those were a couple of the things we heard from the FAA. So they said basically we're working on it, but of course as a community and as a region, as we heard from Mr. Alonso, we need to continue to apply pressure and provide clarity.
Thank you so much. So I totally agree that, I think one of the first things that we really should be looking at is creating that baseline for what is our noise, actual noise that we're experiencing over here. And I attended the San Francisco Roundtable meeting as a liaison a couple of months ago, and it really kind of show that how outside we are, and a lot of the noise has been diverted and the flights has been diverted for whatever reason it is, and it was just a little bit eye-opening. And I think throughout this time that I've been talking to a lot of the citizens and the residents here in Palo Alto, I hear you. I know noise is a big factor, and I've been experiencing myself now with my windows open at night when I go to sleep. But I think the thing that was most apparent to me was when I met a family, and the family was just so beaten down by the noise and just so distraught and just so distressed. It was really hard to even talk to them, knowing that they're going through this. And I see it tonight here in some of your faces, whether you're a neighbor or you're a resident over here, I see it in all of it. So I think that we really have to come up with some concrete ideas in moving forward and not to just sit back. I realize that we're all waiting for FAA to come back with their select committee recommendations. But I think that we still need to keep on pushing and ensure that they are hearing us, that we are waiting. We can't just be silent and wait for them to come back when they are ready to. So I do like some of the suggestions, especially the one about that we need to have experts in this, because as a city, we do not have the experts on our staff in order to push forth our recommendations. So I'd really like to see that we do have the expert, and I'd really like to have a legal advice on this too that is in the field, so that they can recommend to us what we need to put forth. And I would like for staff to also explore reaching out to Mountain View and the cities surrounding us, understanding and recognizing and acknowledging that we're working at this as a region. So we're not trying to shift noise to somebody else. We're asking for equitable distribution. But more so, noise is not just the only factor. There is also emissions. So I think as a responsibility, the FAA also needs to take that into consideration and measure the emissions from from the aircrafts that goes through our city. You know, I know a lot of you have been using your apps, you know, to complain. And, you know, what came out at me at the last San Francisco Roundtable meeting was that, you know, it seemed to appear at nighttime. We don't have that much flights that go through because there's not as much complaints. But really, you know, I've tried to do this at night, and it means I have to wake up at 12, 1, 1:30, 2:30 in order to go find my phone, because you won't get me. It's not right next to me. It's somewhere else in another room. I'm not going to get up and get out and go and do a click on my phone in order to register a complaint. So, you know, I really want to make sure that San Francisco and the FAA recognize that this is not saying that we don't have complaints. We do. It's just that it's at the middle of the night and we're just trying to get back to sleep. You know, I'll hold off with the rest for now. So.
Tom?
Yeah, so as many speakers stated, I mean, the noise started several years ago. I think it was 2 years ago that Policy and Services really started the city's involvement by recommending that we hire a consultant and start to analyze the issue. And I do believe we've seen a huge increase in noise with NextGen. So I'm sorry to say we haven't seen an improvement yet. I know it's taking a long time, but I do hope we're making progress with the select committee. Do we have any idea, have we heard anything about when we expect a response?
Well, I think that some of the speakers acknowledge this right off, and I mean, I would say actually the last packet page in your packet 118, which is really I guess it's sort of a press release from Congresswoman Eshoo, that the draft FAA report is out internally, and as it says that, you know, their notice that the FAA will send their completed document to DOT within a month for final review and authorization. And then when does it come out? I mean, you know, and to be honest with you, other people here would know better than we are how much of a black box the DOT process is and when that really means it. But I do think it says that we should be getting our ducks in a row to be prepared to not only look at, but to respond, engage whatever experts we need to in responding to that report. So it sounds like, you know, sometime this summer to fall.
Yeah, and is staff recommending that something go to council before that report comes out? Or will we wait?
So I don't want to be precipitous, but I did have a couple recommendations, you know, sort of the restatement of the staff report a little bit based upon the public comment tonight, and just, if I could just throw those out to you, I think that they're useful. Trying to be practical also about the process issues related to getting to the council and those sorts of things, so I think that they need to be realistic. A couple of things. One is that, I mean, I think the main one is that you should entrust us, and if you add to it, to take the comments that we heard today. I think that they're clearly aligned enough that we could sort of meld them with some of the statements we put in the staff report, sort of correct and clarify, and where appropriate, reaffirm the city's position and our posture you know, towards this goal of minimizing noise and equitably distributing the impacts. And I do think that we could get that to the council without coming back to the committee in this time frame. And then the council could have a chance to sort of act on that at that meeting. I would also suggest that we pursue the recommendations of, I mean, and the council should endorse, you know, an assertive and active effort to get a seat on the SFO roundtable and to advocate, to push for getting a seat on the ad hoc committee if and when that is formed. And that finally, this issue of the noise monitoring, that, you know, we've certainly gotten feedback that we could get temporary noise monitoring. I know that this is something Councilmember Koo asked us specifically about after one of your recent meetings at, I think, the SFO roundtable. Our sense is the real important thing is to get this sort of permitting monitoring definition, because it sounds like that's the only approach that really directly connects to the FAA or the airport actually making adjustments based upon the data. So I'm sort of outside of my area of expertise, but my sense of that is really saying that, yeah, we could get some temporary monitors, but the value of that is diluted in relation to permanent monitors. And I think Mary Jo's comment were really good that, you know, we have the data, you know, let's make a strong push to advocate that we get the kind of monitoring that actually feeds into the potential for having recommended changes if we've got, say, as she said, 60%. And then lastly, I just think we need to share with the council that we need to be ready for the FAA response. And I would say this, that, and I don't mean to be disagreeable about this, I don't think that more data at the moment is necessary. What's necessary is clarifying and aligning our position clearly to realize that this is a communication and has a campaign aspect, and there's a political element to this in a big way. And that's why the issues of outreach and collaboration. And lastly, I mean, I would suggest that while we've had some degree of interjurisdictional communication and information sharing, you know, that the council's well aware of the success we had with the North County Coalition on the Measure B funding, of us actively working together at both the elected and the city manager level of trying to align our positions as it related to funding. It seems to me that we should be going to council and talking directly about how we work closely at that level, also with the right other jurisdictions, because if we're in a fragmented and, you know, divide and conquer kind of environment. I'm from Washington D.C. originally. I mean, I grew up in this whole environment. This is the easiest way to just leave the status quo. So we've got to make a shift there, I think, on that level to ultimately be effective. It's not just being smart and just having data in and of itself, I don't think is going to get us where we need to go all the way.
So the staff report said there are concerns about noise monitor effectiveness. So what are those concerns?
So I think we can speak to it, but I don't know if this is something that our friend from SFO could be a little more literate on. I don't mean to put him on the spot, but
I'd be happy to hear from the representative from SFO, if you have anything to add.
Good evening. My name is Bert Ganong. I'm the Aircraft Noise Abatement Manager for San Francisco Airport. Your question, please?
The question was, well, the staff report indicated there were some concerns about installing noise monitors. I don't know if it was, what are those concerns?
Well, some of the questions I noted in the staff report ranged from noise metrics all the way to when, how many, what. We did agree with the select committee to do pre and post implementation monitoring for them. For the FAA, basically we do the monitoring, turn the data over to the FAA and the citizens. As far as the program that we do, we typically on areas outside of the noise contour, which is typically the local airport environs. And that's what the FAA has mandated our job be, monitor the local airport environs. Well, gosh, with Surfer, it suddenly became 60-odd miles away, almost 80. We did do a report for them. I brought a couple of them. I'll leave them with you. So we have both the report as well as a frequently asked questions regarding the noise monitoring. It was a portable program. We went down there for 2 weeks, which under the state of California Title 21 noise monitoring standards is adequate. If you want to do it for what they call a permanent portable, you can go once a quarter, the same period each time, and you lay out the monitor in the same location, record the data, and report it. You can actually come up with an annual CNEL, or Community Noise Equivalent level. It's an average noise level, similar to the FAA standard of day-night level, DNL, which is used all over the United States. California had to be a little bit different. The typical for the daytime between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. in California is the straight value of the noise. Between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m., there's a 5 decibel penalty to it, and then at night, there's a 10 decibel penalty. So
is it still an average, or is that a?
It is an average, but what you're doing is you're adding a penalty, because those are the times where people are getting home, quieting down, getting ready to go to sleep. California added in that evening component. The day-night level is 7 to 10, and then 10 to 7, without the evening component.
So it's averaged over like the entire night, even though if there's one or two peak flights that are very noisy, they'll average out?
Well, yes and no. You can also have a loud flight at night that will drive your noise contour or drive your average up due to the 10-time penalty to it. As far as the quarterly monitoring, which I was speaking about, if you do it once a quarter, same location, same period, and you do it 4 times a year, it's considered to be an average, a CNEL, acceptable to the state of California.
And is there an advantage to a permanent monitor versus this sampling?
They're costly. Doing a portable program is not near as costly. And I can speak with the director, but I believe he would back me on, we'd be willing to do that with the city of Palo Alto. We would have to, again, schedule it and work it into the program to do this.
Yeah, but what is the benefit of a permanent monitor? Does it give different numbers? Or?
No, well, you may have slightly different numbers, and I say slightly. The period, if we monitored during, say, reverse flow, we'd be looking at different time period. We also, as the data comes from SFO, if it was fed to us, we would be reporting on SFO noise as the primary aircraft source. Others would be secondary. So San Jose, Palo Alto, Oakland airports would be second noise sources, not the primary. All our reports focus typically on primary aircraft noise, which is SFO.
And thanks for answering all these questions. You said your noise abatement area is right around the airport.
It typically is. I don't know if you've seen the San Francisco airport noise contour.
Yeah.
Rough description of it is somewhat of an upside-down angel, with the head being right there at 101, the wings going out through the gap towards the west, and then towards Foster City, and the skirt being over the bay. It's A-weighted decibel noise contours. The A-weighted decibels are what the human ear is. It's calibrated to what the human ear hears.
But with the concentration over the Menlo waypoint, has there been any discussion about including waypoints as part of the abatement areas, I guess?
As far as the abatement area goes, no. It's the noise contour right around the airport, and SFO's mitigated over 15,000 homes nearby. As far as what noise levels down here are, we have monitored down here as part of the Oceanic Tailored Arrival Program, and the noise levels were below 65 decibels, which is the threshold for mitigation.
Right. And so the temporary monitoring, is there a cost to the city to do that?
I believe, and I can't speak solely without the airport director's backing, but my belief is definitely on the one time, which we agreed to do for Santa Cruz and Palo Alto at the same time many years ago, we would do it gratis. As far as an ongoing program, we will talk with the director and see what his recommendations are.
And is there any, last kind of question on the monitoring, is there any changes in terms of the types of monitors? I mean, they're all state-of-the-art.
Yes,
Yeah.
we're actually in process of purchasing new ones right now, but they are state-of-the-art.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So this question about are we going to hit the average threshold, and I mean, having data would be good. I'd be interested in if there's a way for us to capture peak noise as well as average. The other thing I really think we should discuss is the pros and cons of joining the SF roundtable. We would be one member. I'm not sure. I certainly think the ad hoc committee makes sense, but I'm not sure about the roundtable itself. And I don't know if staff knows. I mean, the SFO roundtable doesn't really. Does it have any actual input into the FAA itself, or is it just about operations around the airport?
No, they do. FAA staff attend the meetings as well as SFO roundtable, SFO noise abatement staff as well. And certainly the FAA gives more weight to the roundtable than any non-existing group.
But if we form this new, what's it called, the ad hoc group, I mean, would that essentially be an equivalent, more relevant to us, or?
I don't think it would be equivalent, similar to the SFO roundtable. I think there are rules and statutes that set up roundtables for airports, but the ad hoc committee proposal by the select committee is different than a permanent, ongoing recommendation that the select committee made. So there was two recommendations the select committee made. That secondary one, the permanent recommendation, could be equivalent to the roundtable based on how the three congressional representatives formed that, and in relation with SFO and the FAA.
So do you guys see any cons to joining the SFO roundtable?
I mean, I think the only con is what Congresswoman Eshoo noted too, is that, we would be the only city from Santa Clara County on the roundtable, and, so I think we should just consider that as you pursue conversations with the roundtable.
Well, I think that's an obstacle, but I think your question is more, if we were able to participate, are there cons? And, my basic thinking is it's better to be inside the tent than outside the tent. But the one concern I would have is that in the near term, would the ad hoc committee, for example, have more influence or effectiveness in the next stage of decision making? And, do we diminish our opportunities, say, to be part of that if we pursue the SFO roundtable? I don't know about that, but somebody always says, well, gosh, we made an exception, we put you on the SFO roundtable, now you want to be in the ad hoc committee, what's going on? So I do think we want to assess what would be most effective and not diminish our voice.
Yeah, I think that's part of my concern, is if the ad hoc committee's the next step, let's focus on that. I guess I also have a little bit of a concern that if we're part of the SFO roundtable, we make our points, but we're always in the minority, and then it says, well, these are the decisions at the roundtable, and Palo Alto is part of that. Have we kind of compromised ourselves? So, I do think we need to wait for the response, but I agree with, I think, several of the speakers that said we need to be ready to take a more aggressive stance. I think we've tried working within the system. We've given it some time. I keep, other cities like Newport Beach and Phoenix have sued and gotten changes. So I do think we need to be ready to ramp it up, and kind of, depending on which way the recommendations come out, I think we need to be ready to ramp up the pressure. So, for myself, I definitely agree with some of the city manager's recommendations that we take some of these public comments to clarify our position, posture. I think personally, I would recommend we focus on the ad hoc committee for now. I would like to hear kind of more, I think, expert opinion on the noise monitoring. Maybe we do an initial monitoring similar to, I guess, what Santa Cruz did. But whether we should have some kind of ongoing program and what that means for us. And then the last thing I think is really, again, to be prepared to respond to the select committee and have some options, and maybe bring those options to council. Kind of a little of, if it goes this way, we should do this. If it goes that way, we should do this. So, thanks.
And I've got a whole lot of thoughts and comments as well before the conversation wraps up. But Lydia, if you had more that you wanted to add.
Just a couple more.
Yeah, please, absolutely. It's a conversation, so we can go back and forth.
Thanks. I wanted to find out from Bert, if possible, the San Francisco contour, the San Francisco airport contour, did it expand as the routes expanded further?
Right now, the noise contour, we evaluate it quarterly, and it's pretty much staying the same. So as louder, noisier aircraft are traded out, we have more frequent aircraft, there is a balance. And that's what this average does. So it looks at the amount of aircraft, how heavy they are, how far they're going, and it balances the whole thing out. So right now, the noise contour is pretty much staying where it's been. Little ebbs and flows here and there, but nothing drastic. We're looking for 1.5 dB decibels change in the local area, at which point we would need to go back through and redo our noise contour. So right now, we haven't seen that. It's just been little ebbs and flows, nothing serious. And we've been analyzing this since 1983, and that was our largest and greatest contour to date, and since then it shrunk.
The contour has shrunk?
Yes, since 1983. Obviously, in 1983, we had the older, louder Stage 2 aircraft, 747-200s, 737-200s, 727s. Those aircraft don't operate here anymore. In fact, United's actually phasing out their 747s by the end of this year. So all those loud aircraft, really loud aircraft, are going away. Many aircraft operators have phased out the 747 already in favor of aircraft like the newer Boeing 787, the 777s, things like that.
So the louder aircrafts have gone away. However, the aircrafts used now are flying slightly lower, right, or a lot lower. So doesn't that balance out in noise equivalence?
I'm not going to say a lot lower. There's a little bit lower, yes, in relation to what we were able to achieve. You have to consider the previous visual approach altitude was requested at 5,000 feet. Right now, they're all under instrument approach, and we're doing that at approximately 4,000 feet.
I think that's why we kind of need the monitors in order to kind of really determine that, because the way I look at it, it doesn't balance out for me. But I really appreciate the explanation, Bert. Thank you so much. And I think also for us, we're kind of for the city of Palo Alto, as well as Mountain View, Los Altos, we're kind of at the border of San Mateo. And I think, being at the boundary and also experiencing San Francisco flow as well as San Jose reverse flow, I think we're kind of in an impact point. And I think as as these border cities, we really need to be included in discussions and in the know with San Francisco's roundtable, as well as the ad hoc, when we do have it. And yes, I can agree, with Councilmember Tom Du Bois about, we have to weigh our chances of getting into ad hoc. But I've also seen the select committee having the members in there in the San Francisco roundtable too. So I think it's a matter of advocacy and also insisting on being on something, or having maybe more of the residents and citizens write into the Congress folks, to get us in there. I'm reading this staff report and the letter that was sent from the San Francisco roundtable on page 69. It really does not address Palo Alto whatsoever. So we need a representative on these teams over here in order to have our voice heard. Given this shot on the screen, it's quite huge, where it covers almost the entire Palo Alto. We can double pane our windows and completely insulate our houses, but like many of the members said, you can't even enjoy your backyard, so I don't think that's something that we can do. I do agree with some of the recommendations on page 3, but when it's time, if I might add some more for consideration, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'll add some more of my own thoughts, having heard from my colleagues, and then we'll go to motions. So I do want to really emphasize that I think it's really important that we do communicate with neighboring cities and collaborate with neighboring cities. I forgot to mention earlier, when we were at the table, literally at the table with some senior people who direct airspace for the FAA, the mayor of Menlo Park was right there with us, working collaboratively, sharing our message, supporting each other. And I hope that, as we continue, this discussion, that we can do the same with Mountain View and with Sunnyvale, and who knows, if we're really lucky, maybe even Santa Cruz and other cities in the area. This really is about finding an equitable and fair solution. There clearly has been a change over the last few years. What we experience here in Palo Alto and some other communities, not just in our area, but around the country, the experiences have changed for residents around the country as a result of NextGen. It's been particularly acute in Palo Alto, but we're certainly not alone. And sharing that experience and sharing our strategy, our political strategy, with our neighbors. As the city manager mentioned, we've worked very closely with our neighbors on other issues such as transportation funding. We work very closely with a couple of other neighbors on flooding issues. We do have pretty good working collaborations ongoing for many years with neighboring cities on many issues. And there's no reason this can't be the same. And this is why we asked for this meeting to start moving in that direction. Because there has been, as I mentioned before, there's been kind of this vacuum, and there has been, some even organizing, community organizing in other communities. I have a friend who lives in Mountain View, had somebody knock on her door and say, sign this petition to oppose what Palo Alto is trying to do, that misrepresented what Palo Alto was trying to do. That's happened, I've heard, in a couple different communities, and I think it's important. I've heard even from counterparts in other cities that they don't want to just have Palo Alto's NIMBYs fighting their NIMBYs. And I think that was a really unfortunate depiction of the issue that we are facing as a region together, and only as a region, as we've heard residents from Palo Alto and Mountain View and the experts and staff say, only by working collaboratively as a region can we share our voices and get the FAA to listen. And so then again, the question is, how do we do that? Given the timeline that we're at, getting a letter to the FAA before they write their next report is probably not going to happen. They've probably already done most of it. It's supposed to be coming out in the next couple of weeks. So I was hoping that we'd be able to get that in, but now that we, since we scheduled this meeting, or at least internally, tried to get this on the books and talked about it at our last meeting of this committee, we've heard that report might be coming out pretty soon. I don't think it's ever too late to tell our residents, to tell neighboring cities, and to tell ANA-SU, here's where we stand as a city right now. Here are our priorities. Here are how our priorities work with your priorities, and let's really team up. I think that's the goal. I do think that the recommendation that we heard from some people in the community and also from staff about, I want to make sure I'm not misrepresenting what staff suggested, but say that we should be ready, right? What we can at least do is clarify our positions, even if we do send something to the FAA, where it might not be influential in the report that they're working on right now, but just say, hey, FAA, thanks for listening to us. Thanks for meeting with us in March. We're still engaged. You've said that you're going to engage with the community again. You're going to do more community engagement after your report. Here's a preview of where we stand. It's not some radical departure from where we've been in the past. And that can, give them kind of a heads up that we're still, trying to be at the table with them directly. And then when the report does come out from the FAA, I think that'll set us up for continuing conversations with the FAA. And I do think that we should recommend to the council really aggressive, but aggressively, and in the sense of time commitment, not in the sense of tone, aggressively reaching out to our neighboring cities to collaborate positively. And that can be done at the staff level, at the mayor level, and possibly council member level as well. Because I think that the competition between cities really just does hold us all back from effectively advocating to the FAA. On the question of noise monitoring, I'm open to that. I'm still kind of on the fence about what the best way is to move forward with that. And on the question of where we should try and get a seat at the table, I think the answer is always try to have a seat at the table. You can be on multiple committees, but the city manager's point is noted that essentially we don't want to blow our political capital trying to get on the SFO roundtable, and then when an ad hoc or permanent committee is created, have people say, well, we put you on the roundtable, so we don't want to put you on this new one. And so I think we should be thoughtful about that. Maybe the way to approach that is to say, look, we want to be on the roundtable because we don't know if these other committees are going to be created. It's a recommendation, but that doesn't mean they'll happen. We don't know when they're going to happen. We can say, look, we want to be on those future committees. In the meantime, we think we deserve a spot on the SFO roundtable, whether it's the ad hoc committee, the permanent entity, which is incredibly vague, or, as has also been discussed, reverse flow into SJC discussion. That's another place where we should try and have a seat at the table. But again, I think that doing the outreach now, so going to city council, having city council authorize city manager to do that outreach and the mayor to do that outreach to neighboring cities now will really help us set that up. We don't want to end up where FAA report comes out and then we're scrambling to figure out what to do. So I think that's that's where we should really focus, is getting ready for that FAA report. And the way to do that is to get the city staff, city council, our residents, and neighboring cities all on the same page as much as possible. I don't know if either of my colleagues wanted to take a hand at starting a motion. I'm sure might have a couple of amendments or changes. Anyone want to give it a shot?
Yep. And Mr. Chair, if I might make a request to the committee, is perhaps the motion formation could be a little more informal than it is when we're with the large body of the council. I think the important thing is to get the general directive so that we can get a staff report back on the council's agenda before you go on break, and knowing that you will, at the council meeting, make some refinements and corrections anyway.
I think that's reasonable and acceptable.
Yeah, so I guess I kind of outlined my motion already, but I'll just restate it, which would be for staff to take public comments tonight to clarify the city's position and posture. Second, to recommend that council endorse and advocate for a seat on the ad hoc committee and any permanent entity's actions will impact Palo Alto, and communicate that interest to Representative Eshoo. Third one would be to get an expert opinion on the noise monitoring strategy, make a recommendation to council. Fourth one, probably be some discussion on this, but I would say reach out to Portola Valley, Woodside, Menlo Park, Mountain View, and Los Altos about a kind of regional position through city managers and elected officials. And then the last point would be prepared to respond to the select committee report.
I'll second that. Would you, first thing off the top of my head before I forget, would you be willing to add Sunnyvale and East Palo Alto to that list of cities and then leave it open-ended if there are other cities?
Well, yes, I guess we could leave it open for staff, but the point is not to be too broad. And, ones really impacted by the Menlo Waypoint, I think, are the ones we want to include.
Right. Well, the reason I mentioned those two is we have a very close relationship with East Palo Alto, and also I think that the local diplomacy with Sunnyvale is going to be really critical, because I think that's where a lot of the tension may exist right now, and so the outreach there is going to be really important in order to come to a regional consensus.
Why don't we just say staff will come back with a list of cities? Yeah.
So I'm very supportive of the motion, with one disqualification that really deals with the anticipation of the FAA report. I'd just sort of say, one, that might be a little complicated for us to figure out, and two, it might not be in our best interest to articulate in advance what, I just think we just need to think about that.
So just to clarify, I think what I mean by be prepared to respond is if we need to hire any consultants or things, have those lined up.
Okay, thank you. That's fine.
And I had a couple more thoughts as well, but Lydia, if you'd like to, I'll defer to you first.
Thank you.
Sure.
If I might also add that we do want to put on the motion that we have, we engage some aviation consultant expert, as well as retain an attorney that specializes in aviation. So we would need to have a budget line item in there, since I think it was very appropriate when the city manager said that, we're not here with knowing how to.
Yeah. Do we already have those? Do we have existing contract?
We do still have an existing contract with our consultants, Freytag and Associates. There's money left in that contract. We could repurpose those funds as well to bring on another smaller contract if we wanted a different noise consultant. And then we'd need to look at the legal outside, counsel.
What's the status of Peter Kirsch and outside counsel?
We do have a contract with Peter Kirsch as well.
You do?
Yeah.
Oh, super. Thank you. I lost my train of thought. That was very exciting news, so thank you so much. Let me see here. So, no, I think that was my main point. Thank you.
So I guess I'm open to whether it needs to go in the motion in an official way, but I did want to clarify a couple of things that I think we should emphasize as priorities, right? I think it was stated by the city manager earlier, stated by community members from Palo Alto and Mountain View, and our resident expert from Stanford, that we should really focus on minimizing noise, equitable dispersion of noise, improving technology and flight methods to minimize the noise in general, because this will have a benefit not just for Palo Alto, but for other cities in the region. And in particular, that we'll be looking for those priorities to be highlighted in the FAA's report. And if they're not, we'll be ready to say, here's what we think was underplayed or missed in the FAA's report, as well as things like creating an ad hoc and an ongoing entity, recognizing that on-the-ground noise matters even if it's outside of the immediate vicinity of an airport, clarifying that noise is a concern under 7,000 feet, but that over 7,000 feet, or at whatever, have some objective standard about, at what elevation through, or combined with what flight methods, does noise become a problem? So that rather than relying on opinion, we can have some objective standard. We can say, at this altitude, this kind of airplane hitting its air brakes is going to create a noise impact, because that's not, in my understanding, something that the FAA really has as clear standards right now outside of the immediate vicinity of an airport. I think we should also, clarify that, night is from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. We should encourage the FAA to define noise shifting. And I do think that we should encourage the FAA to study, so that we can have, an objective third-party analysis, because they've been controversial, of alternative waypoints such as Faith or Dumba, so we can have clarity about what the impacts would be. I don't know if all those things need to be in the motion, but I think they've been heard by the city staff. City staff has received verbal and written comments from the public, and I know you're looking at those. And so I guess, I think that it was in the motion to, let me just double check, Tom, that you had it in the motion to incorporate public input received, in writing and verbally this evening, and ongoing communication with resident experts and our consultants as we develop this before it comes back to council. Yeah, and I would also add, of course, weighing in with our, or checking in with our lobbyists in Washington, D.C. as well.
Okay. All right, that's enough. Our agendas are packed to the end of June. It's going to be a shoehorn to get this in there, and I'm sure you'll discuss this for a while at the council meeting itself.
I think so. And Lydia, I wanted to hear what else you had to say.
I just wanted to add in one more thing, which I had lost a thought on. Emissions, the particulates, and could we add that into it for FAA to consider, along with the noise? What are the emissions that come out from flights going overhead? Also, I know we still have that contract with Freytag, but is there any way to also consult with the Portola Valley person, or the Portola Valley's consultant as well, just so that we're all talking together, all the consultants are consulting and coming up with the correct thing to push forth? Thank you so much.
So I actually just want to mention about the particular matter. This is something I'm actually really, really concerned about, but I'm also sensitive to how we message that. And here's my concern. My concern is that if we're not careful about how we message that, we could be accused of moving the goalposts, or mission drift, or some other metaphorical dismissal, right? I don't want the FAA, when they hear from us each time, to say, oh, Palo Alto's got some other new thing, and then roll their eyes at us. And so I want to make sure that as we raise additional issues, that we can be clear that, this is a separate issue. There is a nexus because it does relate to flight paths, and it does relate to, how much, fuel burn you're doing and things like that. But I do want to make sure that we're careful to say that this is a distinct issue from airplane noise. Anything else to add on to the Christmas tree? Okay, I think that that's pretty good direction for staff, and we'll look forward to it coming to council.
Did you vote on that?
And let's take a vote. That's right. All in favor of the motion? Aye. All right, it's unanimous. And I just want to thank staff. I thank also Bert from SFO coming to provide that clarity, and everybody else who's come to speak from Palo Alto or neighboring communities. Your input was heard. right, we'll take a
Fiber is good for you.
we'll take a 3 to 5 minute break while people who are involved in this filter out, and we'll reset staff.
I saw that. Yeah, I didn't realize.
which is item 2 of the evening, Staff and Utilities Advisory Commission recommendation that the Policy and Services Committee make a recommendation that Council recommend option 2 for the municipal fiber to the node network, FTTN, for fiber and broadband expansion, and expand Wi-Fi to unserved city facilities and discontinue consideration of city-provided Wi-Fi in commercial areas. I'll kick it off. Let the city manager take it from here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. And I would implore, I really hope we could do this in an hour. I don't think it's actually all that complicated. The options 2, we are not going to be able to get to council until after the break on the recommendations from the committee here. And 3, this is not time sensitive in a crucial way. I would just say only in the sense that, 1, I know there's a lot of interest on the council, and 2, I think it is safe to say that we've been discussing this actually even longer than we've been working on the comp plan update, but not quite as long as we have been talking about what to do about the public safety building. Actually on all of both of those other things, we actually, the council's made decisions. We're nearing the end on the comp plan, and we have a way forward on the public safety building. So we're hoping tonight the committee can help move us ahead in a positive way. So with that, Jonathan, you guys want to?
We're ready. We're good. Yes, thank you. City Manager Jim Keane. It's great to be here, Chair Wilbuck and council members. I'm Jonathan Reichenthal, the city's Chief Information Officer. And we're going to start off with just a few updates to bring you up to speed on some of the things we've been sharing with you over the last couple of years, and including some perspective on some emerging tech that I think is very important in the context of this larger discussion. So I want to just a few points on the vendor space. We have AT&T announced last year, as you know, that they were going to bring their gigabit service to Palo Alto called AT&T Fiber. And as far as we know, they still are committed to doing that. I attempted to reach out to them in the last few days, but was not able to get a sort of an update of this week. But as of my last update, just a month or two ago, they were still in the planning phase to begin a initial rollout in Palo Alto and then a more broader later on. We heard from Comcast that they still intend to come to Palo Alto with their upgrade, their box upgrade, their technology upgrade on their existing system to bring gigabit to a Comcast offering. As you know, they enable this through a new version of a particular technology called DOCSIS 3.1. Not terribly important, but that's just the technology they use to enable it. When we last met with them just a couple of months back, they notified us that they would do a soft launch in Palo Alto in 2017, and then later on a more formal, highly marketed implementation. Okay, so I did have a piece I was just going to read that I did share with with our Community Advisory Committee and with the UAC prior to this, because I think there's some good developments that are contextually important. I consider one of my most important roles to be an advisor to the council and the city manager, even if it's unpopular. So I'm going to do one of those today. It's worth noting, even in the short time that I've been involved in this project, how much the landscape has changed. Just in about 3 years, just 3 years ago, there was no AT&T fiber, no DOCSIS 3.1, no Google Fiber, to the extent it is today, no Facebook Terragraph, no millimeter wave, and no 5G. And all of those things are just a set of new technologies and new considerations that are on the list that weren't there before. It's becoming very clear now to me as we look out at the future and we see developments that the future is going to be wireless intensive. Now, when I say that, I know people are ready to really push back strongly on it. By saying the future is wireless, it doesn't discount the enormous importance of fiber backhaul. And in fact, as we move more to a wireless world, we will require more fiber to bring the information back to the providers of, the data centers around the world. Just to give you a sense of this, and I want to kind of talk you through it. In the United States, in 2013, 1 in 10 households were exclusively wirelessly connected to the internet for their access. In 2016, that number had increased to 1 in 5. Effectively, 20% of US households are now mobile-only access to the internet. In 3 years, the number doubled. Part of those numbers are definitely people with lower income because it's cheaper to have mobile access. But the most current data shows that the speed of dropping wired for wireless internet access from home is now equivalent in all income ranges. Why is the future wireless? Because whether it's smart homes, smart cities, wearable technology, connected cars, self-driving cars, the Internet of Things, or even next-generation healthcare, it will all be powered by wireless technology. In fact, there is now a 5th generation of cellular technology, which is called 5G for 5th generation, that we see beginning to emerge as a specification, and we think by 2020 it will be in the mainstream. Now that sounds like a long time to go, but it's just a couple of years. There's lots of experimentation happening. And when we talk about 5G, we're not just talking about cellular phones or smartphones that have fast connectivity. We're actually saying fixed wireless, which is 5G connectivity from your home. And so this is how people have the potential to connect to the internet. That's the strategy that the big telcos will be taking. I'll give you a sense of the sort of speed. 4G LTE, which is typically what a lot of us use on our smartphones. That's approximately about a 5 to 12 megabit download, 2 to 5 megabit upload. And so to put that in comparison, the International Telecom Union has specified or suggested the final specification for 5G. At a minimum, it should be 20 gigabits for download, peak data rate, and 10 gigabit uplink. So I'm going to do the math for you. If you round 4G to an average of 10 megabits, 5G is going to be 2,000 times faster. 2,000 times faster. The average US broadband in the US today, to the average home, is 50 megabits. 50 megabits is the average. 5G will be 400 times the current speed. When I was in Dubai last year, Etisalat, who is the local telco company, they experimented with 5G, and they reached 36 gigabits per second. That's very, very fast. Very fast. Okay. What's required for this? Well, there's going to be a lot of city construction. All cities that adopt this will need to put in a lot more cell towers than we have today, and just cell units, small cells, and they would have to be in high volume and density. Just to give you a sense of the space, Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile are in current tests. And of course, as you know from my last update, Google is looking at a wireless solution that uses similar technology to 5G to bring fiber to the home, or fiber to the neighborhood and then to the home. Verizon has a 5G fixed wireless technology test in 11 geographies and different environments in the US, and they want to launch something in 2018, which is next year. Just a couple other tidbits on this. AT&T is experimenting in Austin and Indianapolis with 5G. And Turin in Italy is committed to being 100% 5G in the entire city by 2020. In this year's Mobile World Congress, which is the big telecom event, the entire event was about 5G. Big players like Qualcomm, Ericsson, Intel, Nokia, and other mobile leaders are all betting their future on it. That was just a contextual item. That's an emerging technology that we anticipate, or I certainly anticipate, will be a very significant player here in just a few years. 2 more items real quick. Sure. We wanted to make you aware that one of the items that was on the council list of action items to get to build out a network for our public safety professionals is going to hit the street. It's scheduled to be on the street this week, so that a lot of good work went into that, and we should be getting responses to that pretty soon for being able to come back and ask for to get a decision from council on whether we should pursue that. And one other item I just wanted to share, just to put things in context, there is quite a lot of activity in the region around high-speed internet. I wanted to just mention San Jose and San Francisco. So in San Jose, the mayor is sponsoring a project that PricewaterhouseCoopers or PwC is doing to develop a broadband and digital inclusion vision for the city. That's just really kicked off and will take many months to see where that goes. And then in San Francisco, there is the mayor also of San Francisco spun up an advisory council made up of industry experts and academics to explore high-speed internet for all of San Francisco. And we should be seeing a series of reports over the next few months. A report of last year on the potential cost came in at a little over $1 billion to build a fiber-to-the-home network in San Francisco, and it would operate at a deficit. So their conclusion was some sort of partnership to get there. In both the San Jose and San Francisco examples, much of the focus is on people who just don't have internet. There still is large populations, thousands of people who don't have any type of access. And then there's also a group of people who have only access to very slow or bad internet. So that concludes my updates. I'm going to now, I think, because we don't need to spend time on this. Today we'll be presenting you with staff, and the UAC is making recommendations to you to recommend to council 3 potential pathways around the question of fiber, and then we will have a recommendation around the 2 wireless items that we've been carrying for a few months to come back to you and make a recommendation. And Jim Fleming is going to talk us through the different options.
Chair Walbach and council members, my name is Jim Fleming. I'm a senior management analyst with Palo Alto Utilities Department. As Jonathan said, tonight we're going to review the 3 options for fiber and wireless expansion as described in the staff report. Option 1 is to explore potential funding models to build a municipally owned, ubiquitous fiber to the premises network based on an open access model. To provide some background, the 2015 Fiber to the Premises Master Plan indicated that, assuming the network achieves the 72% take rate required to positively cash flow the enterprise, the city will require an estimated overall capital investment of approximately $78 million to build and operate a citywide fiber to the premises network. Take rate is defined as the number of homes or businesses that actually use the network. The master plan also stated that if approximately $20 million from the fiber optic fund reserve was used to help finance the network, then the take rate required would be about 57%. Annual operations and maintenance costs would be about $8 million. The city's key objectives for network ownership includes ubiquitous coverage, local authority, and open access. An open access network or model is defined as an arrangement in which a network is owned by the city but would be open to multiple internet service providers to offer gigabit speed broadband and other services. In terms of potential funding models, a key consideration for network implementation is how to fund both capital construction costs and ongoing operational expenses. Acknowledging that capital and operating costs associated with a full-scale citywide build-out will be significant, the city will likely have to seek outside funding and/or internal subsidies to support construction and the fiber-to-the-premises network startup costs. Potential financing models include bond issuances, such as general obligation or revenue bonds, use of the fiber optic fund reserve, and ongoing internal subsidies. At this point, we're going to discuss fiber to the node, which is option number 2. Fiber to the node is a municipally owned network that could provide infrastructure to neighborhoods for private last-mile connections to provision services to homes and businesses. Fiber to the node would be an incremental step to fiber to the premises. The recommended action item for option 2 is to develop a business case for a fiber to the node network to provide a platform for public safety and utilities wireless communications in the field, smart grid and smart city applications, and new dark fiber licensing opportunities. The business case would determine the benefits to the city and also quantify the return on investment. This option also includes a recommendation to engage an engineering consultant to prepare a preliminary design of the citywide fiber to the premises network, in addition to identifying potential partners and/or service providers and last mile funding models. The estimated one-time fiber to the node costs are in the range of $12 to $15 million, but ongoing operations and maintenance costs are unknown at this time. In regard to business case development, a number of approaches could be considered, and staff requests the committee's feedback on next steps. Preliminarily, staff would recommend proceeding with the following 4 steps if council directs proceeding with option 2. The first step is to engage an engineering consultant to initiate a preliminary design for fiber to the premises and fiber to the node. This design will need to make certain assumptions driven by business case models, public-private partnership opportunities, and potential technologies for last-mile service delivery. The components of developing a fiber to the premises network design includes identifying the types of services which will be carried over the network and cost estimates for the geographic layout of fiber routes and outside plant, neighborhood nodes, and integration of electronic transmission equipment. Upon completion of the design and confirmation of the business model, the consultant's scope of services will be structured to enable full citywide fiber to the premises design, but with the expectation that authorization to proceed will occur in phases based on cost estimation, community interest, and/or partnership agreements before incremental last-mile development. The second step involves utility staff developing a public outreach program to solicit neighborhood interest in participating and verifying the business case for fiber to the premises. Residents will be advised that, as envisioned, the city would fund extension of the fiber network to the neighborhood with the understanding that residents may be responsible for some or all of the cost to reach individual homes. An upfront cost estimate per home would be communicated, with cost estimates to be refined as the evaluation proceeds. Residents will also be advised that decisions have not been made regarding service providers. Also, depending on the level of interest expressed, a handful of neighborhoods may be selected to proceed with preliminary network design. The third step involves IT staff exploring marketplace interest in 2 ways. The first is establishing the level of interest in financial participation in the last mile build out, and second is the level of interest in providing gigabit service to neighborhood residents. Participation in both these efforts could be described as integrated or separable levels of involvement. The fourth step, and this would be subject to positive responses to the first 3 steps, staff would engage community stakeholders in identifying priority characteristics of prospective service providers. Topics would likely include characteristics such as services to be provided, customer service expectations, and policies on issues such as data privacy. Potential funding models for last mile include user financing. User financing is an approach that relies on homeowners to pay on a voluntary basis for some or all of the costs to build out the city's existing dark fiber backbone network into residential neighborhoods. Homeowners and businesses would voluntarily finance system build-out costs by paying a one-time upfront connection fee that can range from several $100s to several $1,000s. Another potential funding model is the creation of assessment districts, which may be used to finance new public improvements or other additions to the community. Generally speaking, an assessment district is formed with property owner mail ballot proceedings involving each property that will be assessed in the district. Owners vote yes or no and are weighted by the assessed. It's important to note that under the Melrose Community Facilities Act of 1982, cities and other local government agencies can form a community facilities district to finance certain facilities and services. These districts can levy a special tax and issue bonds secured by that tax upon approval by 2/3 of the registered voters or property owners within the district. Another last mile approach is to explore the potential for a public-private partnership where the city and a private entity would work together to achieve mutual goals for a fiber to the premises network. Option 3 is to pause municipal fiber to the premises development efforts and increase transparency and predictability for third-party providers for their network expansion. In light of the anticipated upgrade plans that Jonathan referred to a few moments ago, the cable and telco incumbents and another option is pausing any further municipal fiber to the premises development at this time. As previously noted, obtaining sufficient market share and acquiring new customers is necessary to financially sustain a city fiber to the premises offering. This would be a major challenge under present market conditions. In the interest of improving broadband in Palo Alto, the city would identify resources and improve coordination of city policies and processes to facilitate network upgrades by the incumbents and other independent internet service providers. To that end, the objective of this recommendation is to enhance transparency and predictability, for third-party providers. Access by third-party providers to infrastructure data and assets such as poles, conduits, and public rights-of-way is essential to encouraging broadband improvements. Ensuring efficient and predictable processes that enhance deployment is equally important, as with any public project. In order to implement this strategy, staff will need to identify additional internal and/or external resources to better facilitate planning approvals, environmental reviews, permitting inspections, and legal reviews. It's important to note that the work to identify these resources and the associated agreements were well underway when staff was working with Google Fiber from 2014 to 2016 to manage the anticipated large volume of activities to build their fiber network in Palo Alto. We're going to move along to wireless recommendations. There are 2 staff recommendations for wireless. The first recommendation is to expand Wi-Fi to unserved city facilities. The expansion of Wi-Fi technology at unserved city facilities and public areas was evaluated with the Community Services Department. Most city facilities already have Wi-Fi access. The plan is to expand that coverage to common areas in the Coverly Community Center, Lucy Stern, the Golf Course Pro Shop and Cafe, and Linton Plaza. A high-level cost estimate for the recommended sites is $165,000 for installation and approximately $6,200 for monthly recurring charges. Funding for this project is recommended to come out of the Fiber Fund, and the monthly recurring charges will be allocated to the respective departments consistent with the city's existing chargeback model. The second wireless recommendation is to discontinue consideration of city Wi-Fi in commercial areas. There is already widespread commercial Wi-Fi coverage in high-traffic commercial areas, and there is a lack of demand for city-branded Wi-Fi services. So to recap, in terms of the recommendation, staff and the Utility Advisory Commission recommendations are as follows. For fiber optic expansion, staff and the UAC recommend option 2, which includes developing a fiber to the node business case, engaging a consulting firm for fiber to the node and fiber to the premises design, and identifying potential partners and last mile funding models. For wireless, staff recommends expanding Wi-Fi to unserved city facilities, including the golf course, cafe, and the pro shop. The UAC did not recommend expansion to the golf course facilities, but staff is recommending that. And also, again, to discontinue consideration of commercial Wi-Fi in high traffic areas such as University Ave and California Ave. So that concludes my remarks and presentation.
Thank you, staff. And I just want to confirm that, City Clerk, we have not yet received any public comment cards. If there's any member of the public that'd like to speak to this item, turn your cards right away. Looks like we do not. All right, I'll turn it to colleagues for any questions, comments, motions. Go for it. And I told the city manager we'd try to be out of here by 9 o'clock for staff.
Hopefully we have more than 15 minutes.
If we need to go slightly over, for important questions, I'm sure that's fine.
It's been a while since we've seen you guys. Thanks for coming back. So if I understood, in terms of the competitive landscape, we're still, AT&T and Comcast are still planning stages.
That's correct.
Is the intent with the fiber to the node option to make it attractive to private companies to offer service and lease the fiber from us?
Do you want to? I'll just introduce it and maybe Jim would add to it. So part of it is to kind of go a little higher level. We definitely want to explore the different business cases before we make the financial commitment to it, and that's what we're proposing. One of them certainly would be that if the city builds it out right to the neighborhood, that a partner would be incentivized to bring it to the last mile. It could be any combination of a third party coming in and owning it completely, depending on customer interest, to the city continuing to partner on that piece, including looking for other funding models. But certainly, I think we would highly recommend exploring it with a range of potential participants.
And you talked about we're potentially facing a lot of microcell construction. I just wondered if one of the goals of the fiber to the node is to make it available to multiple providers so that, again, when people are putting up, say, cell antennas, they would just lease the fiber from us. So is that like a design goal for the network, not just to reach homes, but?
That's a great question for Jim.
Yeah, that would be one of the cornerstones of the fiber to the node concept is to push more fiber out into the community. And in parallel with that, you'll have the wireless carriers, Verizon, AT&T Mobility, and others, building more small cells closer to residential areas. Those small cells will need fiber for backhaul in their networks. So that is one possibility in terms of fiber expansion. Whether they be interested in licensing that dark fiber from the city to be determined.
I would say that we should think of that as a goal to design an attractive network and to have multiple kind of uses. And why is it hard to estimate like the operating or maintenance costs for FTTN at a high level?
It would really be based on the business model and what is the network going to serve? If it was built and the use of it was for public safety, utilities, communications in the field, smart grid and smart city applications, and licensing fiber for backhaul purposes to the wireless carriers, the maintenance costs would be different as opposed to if the network did attract a last mile provider that would build out to the home. So it's really difficult to estimate what the annual operating costs would be. But part of the business case would include trying to determine what that number is. We just don't have enough information at this point.
Okay. I mean, I guess I've been picturing it as extension of dark fiber network, and if we treated it that way, where the city was managing the kind of the infrastructure, physical light level, could we at least estimate, in terms of kind of looking at maintenance costs for our dark fiber network, this would just be more and more miles of fiber that would have similar costs?
The maintenance of just a pure dark fiber network is fairly low.
Right.
Again, it would be what's actually going to be delivered over that network. And if it went beyond just licensing dark fiber, with dark fiber, we're essentially just providing a pipe, so to speak, to a user.
So you're saying we may, so again, I kind of thought that was the proposal here, that a private company would take on expenses beyond that. But you're saying we might consider other business models and incur other expenses beyond just the dark fiber?
Yes.
Okay. And when you talk about a consultant, are you envisioning a person or like a network management firm?
I'm sorry, I missed your question.
When you guys are talking about hiring a consultant to work on the business case, are we talking about a company that specializes in this, or are we thinking of an individual?
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. Ed Shikata, wearing my Utilities General Manager hat here. Our staff discussion really hasn't gotten that specific as to how the business case would be developed, who would be responsible for it. The recommendations I think you've got at this point really are focused on the step of hiring the design consultant as one of the key next procurements we would do, since that would be conceivably a pretty significant design effort.
Yeah, the reason I asked, I'd be interested in kind of a one-stop shop if we find one that could do design and consult with us on the build-out, and not just be like an individual does one piece and then goes away.
Good point. As we have fleshed out the dimensions of moving forward with option 2, it's clear that it will be a multidisciplinary effort, including both the design, the business case evaluation, as you pointed out, as well as the community outreach to identify the neighborhood interest in pursuing the various approaches that have been discussed, as well as Jonathan pointed out, the touch points with the industry to see what would be viable there. So yeah, it really does call for a multidisciplinary approach, and to the extent that we can get an individual that can manage that for us, that would really help simplify the effort of bringing it back together.
So I just wanted to understand, reading the report, and you mentioned it too, that let's talk about a user financing model and potentially communicating that fairly early to residents. What is the thinking in terms of talking about potential prices before we identify a partner or a business model? I was just trying to understand why we would even throw that out to the public, that you might pay $5,000 for some undefined service.
Well, good point, and clearly one that we've had some debate about, how, and I use the term an iterative approach, in that we need to gauge interest among neighbors. Ultimately, if we were to go with that assessment district approach, as Jim pointed out, it requires a 2/3 vote, which is effectively very similar to the market take rate that had been discussed previously. So in some ways, it would be taking a step toward assessing whether there's that level of interest among residents. How to best gauge that? There's been ideas of everything from the a website that allows people to just express interest without any indication of potential cost, to doing some type of upfront costing, so that we don't head down a path of soliciting a lot of interest up front, only to have residents say, well, if you told us it was going to be thousands as opposed to hundreds, I wouldn't have said yes. And so it's that balancing act.
That's why I think the type of consultant, if we could find somebody who has managed a kind of a design, community outreach, kind of the whole business plan piece as a consulting organization, I think that might be really useful. I mean, it seems similar to other kinds of infrastructure projects.
I dare say no one could do it as well as Palo Alto, quite frankly. I'm not sure that the corporate world has done it a whole lot more successfully than we have when it comes to this kind of outreach.
Well, okay.
Google Fiber being a perfect example of it, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I think cities have hired, communication experts. I've been talking to City Supervisor Mark Farrell in San Francisco. I think they've budgeted like $5 million just for the communication piece, knowing that AT&T and Comcast are going to have reactions. They're really thinking about communicating the user benefits up front, so that it's really clear, why somebody would want this. And I just think we need to think about it and be careful about how we ask questions. I also just think, I think the fiber to the node approach is interesting. I think we need to be really clear on what our goals are and what we're trying to accomplish. If part of it's going to be used for smart grid, part of it could be used for small cell antennas, and part of it could be used for home service. I mean, we really have multiple funding sources here, multiple customers. I think that's going to drive the design of the network. And I'd be really interested in, when it comes to council, maybe seeing a little more detail. And again, I know this is early, but just estimating like how many homes would be passed. We talk about last mile, but are we talking about going down residential streets where it's really last 50 feet? Or are we literally talking about going by, 1,000 homes and the home is a mile away? I think it'd be useful to understand that. And that might make it more or less attractive to some of these other potential customers. So again, I think we should really articulate measurable goals. And I guess kind of sooner rather than later, I'd like to, I know it's kind of point of the business plan, but understand if any, what kind of partners might be interested in working with us. Because I think they would, depending, they might want to get involved in the actual design as well. The other thing is, we have some rough cost estimates. We have no revenue estimates. I think it'd be really useful if there was more of an ROI indication when it comes to council. I mean, $70 million sounds like a lot of money, but if it had a great return, great, right? I'm not saying that's the one, but I'm just saying that without any indication of what the return is, it's really hard to evaluate. It would be good to see if there's an expected contribution from the utilities department or the utilities funds if we do use this for smart grid. I think that would help, again, with the funding. I'm glad to see kind of the discussion shift away from just wireless versus fiber to kind of how they work together. There was a little bit of talk about a pilot, and I would just say my initial reaction was, I don't really want to see us do another pilot. We've done pilots in the past. I think it'd be better, and it'd be, the question is, what are we trying to learn? I would much rather seek some kind of rollout plan with maybe an opportunity to stop the rollout if things are going wrong, but not do a pilot, analyze, kind of stop and analyze it, and then restart again. I was wondering, we did approve, money for a consultant a couple years ago. Is that money still allocated, or does it have to be reallocated?
I think my understanding is we still have the ability to use it.
Good, okay. And then I'd really like to see deeper understanding of what other cities are doing. So I think all the cities that we're waiting on Google are now scrambling to come up with their own plans. It seems like a really good opportunity to share knowledge, share funding models. San Francisco is shifting to a model that's not dependent on take rate. They're really shifting to kind of a franchise model where the CLEC would pick up, some of that risk, I guess. And I'd be interested, again, on just understanding, if some kind of franchise license model would work for us. closer to kind of a dark fiber model. And then again, if we were going that direction, I wouldn't see any reason to ask residents, to pay thousands of dollars. It would be more of a partnering strategy. I guess the other thing I would say about San Francisco and San Jose is San Francisco had some high cost estimates. They passed some laws to drive the cost down. They passed a micro-trenching law, and they passed a multi-family access law. And so, we keep talking about costs. It'd be really useful to understand what impact we'd have on our cost if we changed our rules a little bit. Should we consider a micro-trenching ordinance? If that cuts the cost in half, maybe it's something we need to look at more seriously. And I think publicly San Francisco is talking about, people without internet access, but honestly, I think they're really interested in high quality, kind of world-class fiber. And they're using that as part of the message, but it's really about, getting everybody high quality broadband. There's a little bit of mention about the dig once ordinance, and it's kind of ties back to how can we reduce construction costs? Is that work going to be completed? I know it's been being worked on, and we had a little update on that a while ago, but does anybody have an update on kind of the dig once ordinance?
Yes, we're continuing to do the evaluation in terms of reaching out to third parties, specifically AT&T and Comcast, to develop an ordinance. Many cities have developed ordinances that require dig once, but it takes a lot of coordination to enforce a dig once policy. And one of the key things that we went in or discovered early on, street conditions are very important, which would encourage a dig once policy, but getting cooperation from third parties as they do their expansion is difficult sometimes. And we have that issue when we do underground districts, for example, is getting AT&T and Comcast to fully cooperate in it. But yes, the work is proceeding in terms of dig once, and we've had ongoing meetings with AT&T and Comcast.
I mean, I'd really like to see us think about kind of string once as well. So whether it's aerial or underground, but again, if we're looking at a lot of construction in residential neighborhoods to put up these wireless access points, seems like now's the time to get that in place where it'll really help the neighborhoods not to have their streets dug up multiple times. And then kind of the string once ordinance. I mean, we own our poles. I'd definitely like to see the city kind of extract the value of those poles to the extent we can under the law. A couple quick questions on the Wi-Fi portion. The lifetime cost, how long does that equipment last? When you say there's a one-time cost and then the operating cost, is it like a 5 or 6 year life cycle?
I don't know that I know a good answer to that. That's something we need to look into. The current Wi-Fi that the city uses is still, the equipment's still good, the signals are still good, and that's about 5 years. So I think we got a few more years out of it for sure.
Okay.
So it's not imminent, and the replacement is not imminent on that.
And then Cubberley is mentioned, and I just wondered if I don't know, maybe it's more for the city manager, if we're making investments at Cubberley, or if that's one, if we're going to redevelop it, if we'd wait on that one. And same thing, I think recently we hit the parks plan with the golf course. This is something where we would put in golf course Wi-Fi now, or is there redevelopment imminent?
Would Wi-Fi help my drives at the golf course by any chance? No, I think those are good points.
Yeah.
Good things to think about, really, right?
Yeah, it's just
I don't see why not. Yeah.
Maybe Jim could clarify. So some of the cost is the fiber, which regardless of the buildings that were there that would be useful. If there was a new building, the fiber would still be, would not be wasted.
Is the idea that it would go over city fiber for these facilities?
To bring the Wi-Fi to it, yes.
Yeah, okay,
Yes.
good. So I don't know if my colleagues will want, I could like throw out an early motion if you want that you could react to, or you can talk first.
Well, Lydia, do you want to say anything before we move to motions? Well, before we do it, whatever the motion is, but I was hoping we would start actually with the staff recommendation.
It's pretty close, yeah.
Go for it. Give it a try.
So, I mean, it's kind of summarizing my comments. I mean, I am essentially moving your recommendation to focus on the fiber to the node. But I'd like to see a few changes before it comes to council in terms of defining more clearly what the goals are with the fiber to the node. To reach out to other cities on approaches kind of post Google and share funding models if we can. To include some ROI estimates. And to present maybe a high-level idea of what a rollout strategy would be with an estimate of how many homes would be passed. And to flesh out a little bit more of the communication strategy. So like what will we be asking residents and when? And the second part is to expand the Wi-Fi to the unserved city facilities, but look, consider, I guess, if any of those facilities are going to be rebuilt in the near future. So. That's it.
I'll second that.
Was that clear to you guys?
It was very clear to me, yes.
Okay.
Maybe it's kind of.
So, perhaps maybe just to give a quick reaction, I think it's clear it does present a bit of a dilemma to the extent that estimating or even necessarily getting a feel for homes passed presumes some of the work that we anticipate doing as the next step. So for example, the preliminary design. And I'll turn to staff if they see other ways to get there.
I mean, maybe I could word it different. I mean, I'm really interested in, are we just talking about going down Middlefield Road and nothing else? Or is this really, again, is it really the last 50 feet that we're talking about, or literally, last mile kind of connections?
If you don't mind, maybe perhaps a little more informal in the conversation, I think the challenge there depends on which neighborhood we're referring to, and that's where the initial assessment or even identification of a handful of neighborhoods that we think might be interested in pursuing this could be a good starting point to be able to say, if it is Crescent Park or whatever, that here's where the network currently is, here are the extensions and the likely order of magnitude on homes passed versus it would be collector streets and the like. And so I think from staff perspective, we've got no particular preference as to which neighborhoods would be, and or to your other point on the communication strategy, how best to approach it. I think we're somewhat blank slate in the way to best approach it. So certainly open to the pointers from the committee as to where you think we ought to go with that, and we'd be happy to follow up. In the absence of that, we may be shooting in the dark a bit.
I mean, it kind of ties back to the goals. I mean, if we reach out to some of the cell companies and potential customers, and there were areas of the city that they were willing to pay to get access to, or also part of the business model, I think, might be density of homes, if there's certain areas where we could roll out more cheaply. Again, that's where I really think somebody who's built out a network as a consultant to us might be able to offer some strategy about how to roll it out, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm a little bit, I don't want to just do like a survey monkey survey and then pick a neighborhood. But
okay. And I guess I just want to kind of follow up on this and see if we need to amend the motion at all. As worded, the additions beyond the staff recommendation, do you see that besides not being clear enough, do you anticipate that would cause substantial delay in this coming back to council? I know we do have a tendency to add new things at every meeting, and we're doing a little bit of that here. At the same time, I support the motion because I think the points are good ones. I guess I'd be open to having them be requests, but we can continue to iterate. They can still come to council even if you haven't fully answered every single one of those questions, but to the degree reasonable by the time it comes to council to have started to look into those issues. That was what I was envisioning with the motion as seconder.
So I was going to have a little stab at answering, and then Ed can add. My way I kind of heard the response a little bit was the actual motion that we're asking for will have answers that will answer Councilmember DuBois' questions. So we have to do the work to get those answers. Some of them we just wouldn't be able, like the ROI estimates, for example, would depend on the business case. And so coming back on August 14th without actually doing the business case work it's difficult. It's like
chicken and the egg.
Chicken and egg situation. There's some guessing or that we could do, but it wouldn't be as well informed as it will be when we do the actual business case work.
Well, I guess maybe do we want to change the motion to make it a little bit more flexible for the staff?
I mean, I'm asking for estimates, call them guesses, but I mean, I would just, and also I think it's kind of maybe how you present it to council. If it's just presented as pure cost with no benefit, if there's some way you can quantify the benefit, understanding the models may change, but hopefully we're starting to hone in a little bit on a model as well, even though we still need to do the actual work.
I guess what I would add is just, if it's truly not possible to provide any of those things we've asked for as the additional requests, if it's truly burdensome, bring those back as they become clear. That these are the things we want to eventually be able to answer. These are the kinds of questions we're thinking about, and as it becomes clear and possible to answer those questions, to bring those back to council.
So given that clarification, perhaps what we can do between now and when we get to council, or what we would present to council, would have some qualitative perspectives on each one of those issues without putting numbers behind them. And I think we can perhaps advance the discussion by identifying what we would hope to get out of the next steps. And again, maybe some prototypical applications of things like, again, the network approach that we would take, as well as some of the goals that we would hope to see that would ultimately be fleshed out based upon the further work and next steps.
If I could actually just ask a couple other questions. And actually, Councilmember Koo, do you have questions as well? I'll refer to you.
Thank you. Just a question. So it's going to go to council next, not so much coming back to policy and services, right? So is the goal when it goes to council that we have most of the answers so we don't send it back for another study?
Well, it sounds like this is, I'll let staff weigh in, but it sounds like this is it's going to be a long-term project and very iterative, and so it'll be checking in with UAC again, I'm guessing, and it'll be coming back to committees, but we're talking about a potentially multi-year project, right?
Yes, and so based on the motion as currently stated, I would imagine our next step would be to council with some additional information as just described. And I would definitely think that's an important step, because our step after that will be to procure several of these professional services. And in order to ensure that council is giving us clear direction to proceed with that, that would be the next items for us to bring forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess my next couple of questions. One is, sorry if I missed in here, is the option still available if we do this? Would there be a level of option in the future for the city to run that last mile itself as a potential, rather than going private if we did decide to do public? Basically, if we can fiber to the node be a stepping stone to fiber to the premises?
Yes.
Great.
Clearly it could.
That
and
was my
we'll help
understanding, and I wanted to just make
sharpen
that really
pencils
explicit.
on what that would mean.
Yeah, I just want to be really explicit about that. That was my understanding. Thank you for confirming. And I saw some of the public questions and stuff during looking at the minutes of the UAC meeting. Also, on the question of parks, if you looking at page 14 of the report, I guess there was a determination made for policy reasons not to explore more expansion to parks, that it would diminish the safety or even the quality of the experience of going to a park. I guess I would probably have a different take on that from a policy perspective, that being able to check your email, if you want while you're sitting on a park bench doesn't hurt. What I didn't see was, and I might have missed it, the costs for expanding to different parks, per park, or if there was something like that. I don't know if there's any more thought about that, or any more information about that.
We did do, and in our prep work, we know the cost of all the parks, but the community service director, in consultation with the community group for parks, really ruled it out. And I'll give you one example. Broadly, staff wanted to support Wi-Fi at the Magical Playground, so my team was asked to provide it. We went over there and provided it, and there was a very strong reaction to it, and we had to immediately take it away. Parents and advisors to the community service director said, you can't have that here, and so we had to take it away. Just as one example.
That's very interesting. I guess I wonder if that would still be true at all other parks. Would that be true at Greer Park, where you might have people there for quite a while they're watching, with a lot of other parents around, but watching their kids play team sport, or over at even say Foothills Park or the Baylands, where you want to check your email while you're at the visitor center and then go for a hike and check it again when you come back. I'm not sure if this is the end of the line for that discussion, or we'd still again have the option to revisit that in the future, I suppose.
I mean, the ability to revisit, absolutely 100%, yes, is the answer.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion?
I just had another question. So have we seriously looked at running fiber in some of our utility infrastructure, whether wastewater pipes or gas lines? Is it something we've rolled out?
We already have fiber to critical facility substations, for example. There are other more remote locations where monitoring may be done with an old packed bell or a copper line. It doesn't require fiber necessarily to that location, because it would be overkill.
Now, I'm talking about running fiber to neighborhoods, but putting it through the gas line or through the wastewater.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. I'm going to defer to Dean Batchelor on that.
You haven't looked at it at all? Okay. I think some cities are doing that, particularly in Asia, I believe. Just curious. So, should we vote on the motion then?
Yeah, let's. That's it. All right. All in favor of the motion? Aye.
Okay.
Aye. All right. That's unanimous. Yeah, and that included. The motion did include the wireless as well. Thank you, everybody. Okay. Last item. Or post item. Future meetings and agendas. So at our next meeting in June, we will be talking about the marijuana item that we pushed forward from this meeting, as well as privacy and surveillance, and I can't remember off the top of my head what else will
we also potentially have Coverly Master Plan RFP. We'll have to see where the school board is in their consideration of it, so that it's most timely. We also have 2 audits in utilities, one on contract oversight, trenching, and installation of electrical substructure, and the Hydromax cross-bore contract audit. They may or may not be ready, and they are not time sensitive. So I would work with the auditor to probably remove 1 or 2 of those items if Cubberley and data collection would still stay on there, because you've got marijuana then also. Okay?
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. And the date we're looking at for that is still the 13th of June.
That's correct.
Okay. Any other thoughts from committee members? Just a chance to check in about future agendas. No obligation, just want to make sure that you're included in that conversation always. All right, great. Well, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.